In St. Louis, the serial killer strikes and vanishes, leaving little evidence in his wake. Blending into the community, he confounds authorities for more than 3 decades. To catch him, police must find his weakness and reveal the true face of a murder. In this program, some of the names have been changed. On the evening of Thursday, November 3rd, 1977, 2 men drove up to an Illinois farmhouse.
Evening, sir. How are you this evening?
Oh, fine.
Okay. You're Mr. Grant, right?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm Bob Beck, and I'm from...
While one man waited in the car, the other introduced himself as a representative of the Farmers Union.
Sure, come on in.
Great. My pleasure.
Alan Graham led him into his home. About a minute after the man entered the house, Alan and Velma Graham lay dying, the latest victims of a vicious and cold-blooded killer. The Madison County Sheriff's Department received a call that a man and his wife had been shot. Paramedics were dispatched to the location. Velma Graham died at the scene. Her husband, Alan, died later that night. Investigators secured the house and called for crime scene technicians to process the evidence. Detectives from the Madison County Sheriff's Department arrived as the ambulance was leaving. Bob Hertz worked the scene.
At first glance going into the house, it was obvious that the house had been ransacked. The house was in disarray. One of the immediate assumptions made on my part was that it appeared that this could be a situation where a burglary to the house went haywire.
Detectives searched the plundered home, but found no clues that could lead them to the killer. Madison County Prosecutor Donald Weber joined the investigation.
Who did that?
There's just something about some crime scenes where you get a very cold feeling. There's no trails, there's no leads. This is going to be a long one. And that's the way I felt that night when I went in that house. This is going to be a long investigation, and we're going to have to get lucky to catch these people.
Turning up no leads, investigators called in the Illinois State Police. Sergeant Dennis Kuba encountered a community paralyzed by fear.
People were concerned of living in that area. What kind of person would come in and commit a home invasion, robbery, and put 2 people on the floor and put a gun behind their head and kill them? And so we constantly had phone calls. It was a frustrating feeling. Barbara.
Oh, it'll be all right, Russell.
The murders of the Grahams left their son Russell and his wife Barbara Boyle Graham devastated. The Grahams were well respected in the community. The police had no idea who could have wanted this couple dead.
Thank you for your support.
Detectives attended the funeral. They were on the lookout for anyone suspicious. They found nothing.
Open wider. That's it. Here we go. Up.
In their search for a robber desperate enough to kill his
We're almost
victims,
there.
police never considered he might be hiding behind the mask of a trusted professional. Like Glennon Engelman, doctor of dentistry.
We have to do it again.
Doctor, I'm sorry.
That's okay, Karen. Please.
Dr. Engelman worked out of a small office in nearby St. Louis's South Side.
Tooth that I'm working on right now is the lower left-hand quadrant.
He was a mediocre dentist, but he was the best many of his working-class patients could afford.
Thank you.
Engelman may have lacked skills as a dentist, but he more than made up for them as a killer.
Karen? Yeah. Go to lunch now. Okay. Thank you.
He had grown up in St. Louis and still kept a close circle of old friends. One of these friends was Barbara Boyle Graham. As a result of her in-laws' murders, Barbara's husband would soon be a rich man. Everything seemed to be working just as Engelman had planned. It was now time for he and Barbara to begin working closely together.
Anything you show.
Very closely.
Smart.
Glenn. I need to talk to you.
While he was plotting with Barbara, his relationship with his third wife, Rita, was on the
What do
rocks.
you want?
His modest practice never seemed to bring in enough money, and it seemed they were always short on cash.
Hi, Rita.
To make up the shortfall, Engelman turned to the business of murder. Police in Illinois continued to investigate the Graham murders. It seemed all they had were dead ends. Madison County Detective Bob Hertz was haunted by the senseless nature of the crime.
You take a case like the Graham killings, you spend 18, 20-hour days for weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. The only case that you work, and after 4 or 5 weeks, you sit back and you analyze where you're at, and you're really no better off than you were 4 or 5 weeks ago. The level of violence in this case is the thing that really keeps you moving. You can't forget what happened.
Police had no real leads. The only people who benefited from the killings were the Grahams' 2 sons, but nothing linked them to the crime. Russell Graham inherited $250,000 as his share of his late parents' estate.
Hi, honey. How are you? Oh, wet. They're wet.
Okay.
So, how's
His
it
wife,
going?
Barbara, had taken out several life insurance policies on her husband, totaling over $160,000.
Oh, no.
I'm gonna go to the store and buy the parts.
Okay. Bye.
I'll see you later.
Almost immediately after the couple was married, Barbara began obtaining these policies through the mail without Russell's knowledge, forging her husband's signature on the applications. With all the insurance policies in place, it was time to put the dentist's plan into action. On the evening of March 31st, 1979, 17 months after the death of his parents, Russell Graham left for his job at an oil refinery. For Barbara and her old friend Glennon Engelman, it was the night they had been plotting for nearly 2 years. Barbara had persuaded Russell to change his will, naming her as his sole heir. She would also get Russell's life insurance benefits. Barbara's share of her dead in-laws' estate would be another $250,000. Upon Russell's death, she would gain over $500,000. For killing Russell, Barbara agreed to give Engelman $50,000. Hiding in the garage, Engelman and his friend Bill Carpenter waited for Russell to come home. Russell looked toward his wife, as if expecting an explanation. As he lay on the ground struggling for breath, Engelman struck Graham 2 or 3 more times with a sledgehammer. He removed Russell's watch and wallet, which he placed in a trash bag. He also placed the sledgehammer in the bag, then covered the body with a second bag. There was a considerable amount of blood on the floor. Barbara immediately began to mop it up with towels. Russell Graham was a big man, 6'2" and 260 pounds. Dragging him into the back seat was extremely difficult. For Barbara to wait a few hours, then call the refinery to inquire if Russell had to work late. She then started calling the hospitals, and finally in the morning called the police. With Russell's body in the back of the Camaro, Engelman drove his friend Bill Carpenter back to the shopping center where they had left his car. Carpenter then followed Engelman to the parking lot of a seedy motel known for prostitution in East St. Louis. The dentist put prophylactics in Russell's pocket so it would look like he was seeing a prostitute, and kept his wallet and watch so it would appear as if he'd been robbed. Then waited to hear from Barbara. Finally, the next day, she reported her husband missing. When the police showed up, Barbara played her part perfectly.
Thank you.
No one suspected she had conspired in his murder. The maintenance manager in a motel in East St. Louis noticed a body in the back seat of an abandoned car. Investigators found no identification of the body, but the license tag indicated the car was registered to Russell Graham. Checking to see if it might be stolen, they learned that a missing persons report had been issued on Graham. The description was sent to the police. Graham's head had been wrapped with towels. Forensic technicians processed the car, but no fingerprints were found, besides those of Graham and his family. coroner determined he died from a gunshot wound. In a pocket of his jeans, investigators found the condoms Engelman planted there. The part of town where Russell Graham's body had been discovered was notorious for prostitution and street crime. Sergeant Dennis Kuba theorized that he had been killed while cruising for sex.
We had thought the way things looked and the way he was killed and outside of a hotel, and that there was prophylactics in his pocket, that perhaps the shooting was related to him visiting a prostitute.
Investigators hit the streets. They were looking for any leads that might point them to the killer. For Madison County Prosecutor Donald Weber, something about Russell Graham's murder didn't sit right.
He was left down in a neighborhood frequented by prostitutes, at a motel frequented by prostitutes. There were suspicious circumstances, but none of those checked out with respect to Russell's character. He simply wasn't that kind of person. He was a steady worker, he was a good son, he was a loving husband.
The investigation into Russell's death stalled, as had the investigation into his parents' death 2 years earlier. Donald Weber felt there had to be a link.
Everyone's first impression was that the three murders were related, had to be related. There simply aren't coincidences like that in law enforcement. But there was no evidence to link the two crimes.
Without evidence, the police had no hope of identifying a suspect. All they knew for certain was they had to capture this killer before he claimed another victim. An Illinois family and the victims of 3 murders. A farm couple in Madison County had been shot to death in an apparent invasion robbery. 2 years later, one of their 2 sons was found murdered in the back of his car in East St. Louis, Illinois. Police wondered if the crimes were related, but they'd run out of leads. And then they got a break. A prison inmate confessed to the murder of Russell Graham.
Morning, Mr. Jackson. All right.
In a detailed statement, Alan Jackson told a detective that his girlfriend lured Graham into a motel room for sex. They were planning to rob him, but he fought back and Jackson shot him. The Illinois police closed the Russell Graham murder case. While police were chasing dead ends in the murder of Russell's parents, the dentist was having troubles of his own. Engelman was in debt to a St. Louis dental lab. He tended to be careless when taking impressions of his clients' teeth.
Put those away.
How's it going, son? Got about another hour probably on this one. He's almost...
The lab was run by Susan Barnes, who had begun to charge the dentist for the additional time spent correcting his poor workmanship.
Can you get these done in the next hour? Yeah. Great. Good work, son.
Susan Barnes had been hounding the doctor for payment.
Okay, I'll get them done.
Engelman was furious about the charges and refused to pay them.
I know that voice. Yes, Susan? Yes?
I've come for my money.
She was growing tired of waiting for her money and decided to sue the dentist to collect. In order to solve his own financial problems, Dr. Glennon Engelman had killed Barbara Graham's in-laws and her husband. She then inherited the family fortune and collected a huge insurance settlement. Engelman was waiting for his cut from his close friend, Barbara.
It's okay, Karen. I've been expecting him.
Dr. Engelman?
Yes, sir.
The payoff he was expecting turned out to be a summons from Susan Barnes.
Sorry about this, Nancy. Must be some mistake.
Engelman had no intention of going to court. He also had no intention of going to jail, and thanks to Alan Jackson's confession, Engelman felt certain no one would suspect him of killing Russell Graham. Now he decided to take care of Susan Barnes. Engelman went to work. January 14th, 1980. Susan Barnes left her St. Louis dental lab at 4:45 that afternoon. A judgment against Engelman was to be enforced in just 1 week. The court would force him to pay her the money she was owed. The doctor's office was close enough to the lab that he could see the smoke from the explosion from his window.
Look at all that smoke.
Susan Barnes was no longer around to take Engelman to court.
What was it?
Because the dentist couldn't pay his bills,
That's
he had
amazing.
simply
I wonder what that
eliminated
is.
his creditor.
Police department, can I help you?
The St. Louis, Missouri police got a call that a car had been bombed in the southern part of the
Think it was
city.
a bomb? Okay, what address?
Officers and firefighters were dispatched to the scene. When they arrived, they observed that the driver had been killed instantly by the blast. Calling in the vehicle tag number, investigators learned it was registered to a Susan Barnes. An attaché case with papers also belonged to Barnes. The entire St. Louis bomb and arson unit responded, along with federal agents specializing in bomb investigations. Investigators observed that pieces of the car and the woman's body were scattered over a 2-block area. In the city of St. Louis, 21 persons had been killed over the previous 2 years in car bombings. Federal agent William McGarvey, who was called in to work the case, suspected it was connected to the mob.
St. Louis had been experiencing a rash of automobile car bombings. We've had quite a few, and we've investigated a number of automobile bombings in the St. Louis area. Now, those bombings were related to a feud between two factions of an organized crime group who were fighting over control of the local labor unions in St. Louis.
But this didn't fit the pattern of the other bombings. For one thing, the victim was a woman.
Yes, right here.
Investigators canvassed area residents, but no one could recall noticing anything unusual that afternoon. Police and federal agents processed the scene late into the night. The murder of Susan Barnes was a puzzle that agents worked tirelessly to solve. It was on their minds constantly, even when they weren't officially caught. Each week, investigators got together to discuss their cases. As McGarvey explained the Barnes case, another agent thought it sounded similar to a bombing incident that had taken place 10 months earlier. The agent went on to explain to McGarvey that on the afternoon of March 20th, 1979, the St. Louis Bomb Squad and federal agents responded to a reported bombing at a duplex on the city's south side. Technicians recovered 7 sticks of dynamite from the backyard. A homemade pressure switch and parts of a 6-volt battery were also found. For some reason, only a minor explosion had taken place, scattering the dynamite. The resident, Susan Barnes, told the agents she'd been awakened by a loud noise early that morning, but thought nothing of it until she returned from work and saw the damage. The agents discovered that the dynamite had crystallized, causing the explosion to go awry. To McGarvey, it was clear that someone had wanted Susan Barnes dead for some time. The agent learned that the day following the attempted bombing, police had visited the intended victim at her dental lab. Barnes had told them that her ex-husband started the business 27 years earlier. Their divorce had been amicable.
Been friends. We're better friends now than we were before.
She did mention that a certain dentist, Glennon Engelman, owed her money.
me, Doctor.
Yes, Karen.
There are two gentlemen here to see you.
Okay. Be right back. Please remove the cotton rolls from Pat's mouth.
Police and federal agents questioned Engelman about the house bombing, but learned he had an alibi.
Usually on Thursdays, I do my charity work for dental patients.
His alibi checked out. With no physical evidence to tie the dentist to the crime, his name was taken off the list of suspects. McGarvey suspected the two incidents were related. To confirm there was a connection, McGarvey turned to Harold Messler at the crime lab. He asked him to compare the evidence from the recent bomb with a device found outside Susan Barnes' garage. Messler focused on what remained of the triggering devices from both bombs. The bombs matched. The federal agents now knew the killing of Susan Barnes had been planned for some time. McGarvey put the dentist back on the list of suspects. He suspected it may have been Glennon Engelman's way of settling his feud once and for all. What the agents needed now was proof. As investigators searched for Susan Barnes' killer, Special Agent McGarvey began looking into the victim's finances. He learned that Dr. Glennon Engelman owed her money, and Barnes had been suing him to collect it.
Just gotta fill this cavity.
Excuse me, Doctor. There are some gentlemen here to see you.
Not now, Karen. Hey, Dr. Engelman. Agent Brown.
The agent wanted to talk with the dentist.
I really hate to bother you.
Only take a few minutes of your time. I'm sorry.
Catherine, we're going to have to reschedule. Is that okay?
He agreed to come down to the station. Once he arrived, Engelman refused to answer their questions. He also refused to be swabbed for explosives residue or submit to any other type of examination.
Unless you want to arrest me, please do so. Process me and give me my phone call. Otherwise, I'd like to get back to my office, gentlemen.
Special Agent McGarvey.
During the course of the interviews with Dr. Engelman, he was extremely arrogant. He was self-assured. And he thought he was smarter than everybody else around him.
211, code 4.
Without any physical evidence to charge him with, they had to let him go. While en route back to his office, Engelman offered the police some advice.
You got the wrong person in this car.
He told them that Barnes had a disgruntled ex-employee, a delivery man whose hours she had cut. And this, according to Engelman, might give the delivery man a motive for murder.
Sure. What you need to do is go through her records and find out who this guy is, bring him in, and interrogate him. Well, I think you should be writing this down.
As with the first bombing attempt, Engelman claimed he had an alibi. He had been booked solid with patients all day. As proof, he gave the police a page out of his appointment book.
January 14th. Does that make you happy?
Yes, sir.
Anything else I can do for you?
Again, Engelman's alibi checked out.
I would just love to do some more for you. Other than that,
The agents had
Have a good
nothing
night.
to tie him to the bombing.
thank you.
To try and confirm Engelman's story about an angry ex-employee, investigators interviewed the victim's ex-husband. John Barnes Sr. said he knew nothing about any angry employees. When asked what he knew about Glennon Engelman, Barnes said he and Susan were once good friends of the dentist, but that changed after Susan took over the lab. He told the agents that over 20 years ago, Engelman was suspected of being involved in an unsolved murder. The victim, said Barnes, was a man named Ted Baker. Investigators dug up what they could find on the Baker killing. An officer was sent to retrieve the files. "20 years after the fact, the case was still unsolved. As agents pored over the files, they learned that in the late 1950s, the murder of Ted Baker made headlines.
That case was one of St. Louis's most famous unsolved homicides. That case involved the shooting of Mr. Baker and the running over of him with an automobile.
On the evening of December 17th, 1958, a St. Louis police officer responded to a report of an apparent accident near a local museum. But this was no ordinary hit and run. The officer observed 3 penetrating wounds to the victim's face. There was also a large pool of blood several feet away. It appeared that the man had been lying in the street, bleeding for some time, before being struck by a vehicle. His driver's license identified him as Ted Baker.
All right, I suppose.
Baker's widow, Edith, told police she had no idea what her husband might have been doing behind the art museum. He had been married for only 6 months, she said.
Were you ever married before?
When asked if she had ever been married before, Edith said yes, but Ted didn't know it.
You mean you never told him?
Retired St. Louis police detective Jim Hackett remembers he was shocked.
She was a young girl, and then when she topped it off and said, yes, I have been married before, but my present husband, who happened to be the deceased, was not aware of it. Boy, that really jumped out at me. I thought that was highly unusual.
Edith Baker told Hackett she'd been married to a dentist, but they had divorced 3 years earlier. She said his name was Dr. Glenn Engelman, and he had also been her late husband's dentist.
Of course, his wife and I.
As McGarvey read the old police files, he learned that officers from the St. Louis Police Department went to question Engelman, who at the age of 31 had married a second time. The couple was living with the dentist's mother.
What can I do for you, John?
Engelman claimed he had been in his office seeing patients at the time Baker was murdered.
Then I took about an hour to go get my wife a Christmas.
He'd just gone out to buy a Christmas present for his wife.
Emergency patient. It took me to about maybe.
He made some statements as to where he was on the evening of the incident, and in checking them out, there were some loopholes. There were some times that were not accountable.
Although Engelman was a suspect, without any physical evidence, the 1958 murder investigation hit a dead end. Reviewing the nearly 22-year-old case, McGarvey learned the insurance company paid Baker's widow $64,000. Investigators then learned Edith Baker invested some of the money in Engelman's business. It seemed the more Agent McGarvey learned about the dentist, the more questions arose. McGarvey wondered if the dentist's third wife, Rita, held any answers. He learned the couple's rocky marriage had recently ended in divorce.
We also discovered that they had been divorced for about 2 years, and that the divorce was a very messy divorce. They had some problems with child custody, and there was a lot of hard feelings about the divorce. So we decided that it might be a good idea to contact her to see if she had any information that she could provide us about the background of Dr. Engelman.
Investigators suspected Rita might know something about the bombing death of Susan Barnes. 5 days after the bombing, agents paid her a visit.
Hi, Reed. Bill McGarvey.
She had a 10-year-old son by Engelman, and that kept them close.
Listen, you know, it's time.
She told the agents she still saw the dentist regularly, but was reticent to talk about it.
She appeared to be very nervous. She appeared to be terrified. And she told us that she didn't want to talk to us because she felt that she was going to be Dr. Engelman's next victim.
The agents assured Rita their conversation would remain confidential.
After some discussion, and after providing her with some guarantees that we would protect her and her son, no matter the outcome of the case, she agreed to talk to us about what she knew about Dr. Engelman.
She invited them in.
So she then began telling us about the information that she had. Now, during the course of their marriage, Dr. Engelman had told her about several murders that he had committed. He either told her or he intimated to her that he had committed these murders. In some of the murders he went into detail, others he did.
Agents asked Rita Engelman to come into their offices for an interview.
Listen, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and for the...
They wanted more details about her ex-husband's violent past.
Let us know why you're here and what you want to talk about.
Rita told the investigators that Engelman had threatened her life.
Discuss on my ex-husband.
He vowed to take their son away from her. Nothing would stop him, he said.
Over my dead body.
That can be arranged!
Engelman intimated that when Brian reached the age of 14, he would kill Rita if necessary to get his son.
There were several times when he told her that a boy does not need his mother anymore after the age of 14, and that he was going to do anything in his power to get custody of his boy.
Rita said she divorced Engelman 2 years earlier in 1978 because she was finally convinced he was dangerous and capable of murder. That fact first struck home on September 5th, 1976.
Proud of it. Brian's always asking, where's Dad? He's never here.
It was Labor Day.
He never spends
They
time
were still
with me.
married at the time, and Rita was angry with Engelman for not spending the day with her and Brian. He came home in the middle of the afternoon and immediately took off his muddy clothes and began washing them. Engelman told Rita he had been out to a quarry near Pacific, Missouri, and had just killed a man.
What?
The victim, he said, was Paul Henderson.
Mm-hmm.
It was over. I just shot him.
What?
Made it look like a bunch of target shooters did.
Terrible things.
The dentist told Rita he shot Paul Henderson to help out his wife, Maria Montoya Henderson. Maria had worked for the dentist and he had taken her under his wing. She needed money, and Paul's life insurance policy paid handsomely. Engelman was supposed to get $10,000 as part of the deal. He needed it to pay his taxes, Rita said.
You can't know any of this.
He won't know.
It was a chilling story, but investigators wondered how much of it was true. If it was true, they would need some proof. Before going any further, they needed to check it out. It had only been 4 days since the bombing death of Susan Barnes, and agents began keeping a closer watch on the dentist. If Rita was telling the truth, they were looking at a serial killer whose crimes reached back nearly 30 years. Less than a week after Susan Barnes was killed by a bomb outside her St. Louis dental lab, investigators had narrowed their list of suspects. Special Agent McGarvey was unsure how much he could believe of Rita Engelman's story, especially her assertion that her ex-husband was involved in a murder in the late 1970s. McGarvey began to scour the police records to try and corroborate her story. He called John McCready of the St. Louis County Police and asked him if he knew about a murder that occurred around Labor Day 3 years earlier in his jurisdiction.
Hey, Bill, how are you?
McCready confirmed that a murder did in fact occur at a quarry in Pacific, Missouri on that very day. The victim, Paul Henderson, had indeed been married to Maria Montoya.
McCready told us that he was very familiar with that case, that he had worked on the case, that he supervised the detectives on that case, and it was still an open investigation.
With no real leads, the case had gone cold. McGarvey compared what Rita Engelman had told him with the police file. McGarvey learned that on September 5th, 1976, nearly 3.5 years before the bomb and death of Susan Barnes, police received a report of a shooting at a quarry. When an ambulance crew arrived, they found 26-year-old Paul Henderson barely conscious, with a single gunshot wound to his back. Henderson was pronounced dead on arrival at a local hospital. Highway patrol officers questioned the victim's wife, Maria Montoya Henderson. She said they were on a walk when a shot came out of nowhere. Lieutenant John McCready recalls Maria's story.
She said she didn't really know what happened, that she was just standing there and all of a sudden she hears a noise, and the next thing she knows her husband's on his knees and he's saying, "Get me help."
Maria pointed out where her husband was standing when he was shot.
And then there was a cross constructed out of duct tape taped to the wall, which gave the appearance that this cross was a target and that someone from the hill across the pond was shooting at this particular target.
Okay, I've got a gun over here. Detective? It's called forensics out. Okay.
Hidden under a pile of leaves, investigators found a bolt-action rifle with a telescopic sight. Despite their suspicions, investigators had no evidence to prove that Paul Henderson's death was anything but accidental. Within a week of the killing, a ballistics test confirmed that the rifle found at the scene had fired the fatal bullet. It was examined for latent fingerprints, but none were found. By tracing the serial number of the rifle, they learned the gun was stolen. The investigation was getting nowhere.
And that's when we decided we would do a background investigation on the victim's wife, also on the victim himself.
Maria Montoya Henderson was so distraught she checked into a hospital. Her brother Jose, who was a close friend of Dr. Engelman's, kept watch and screened her calls. Maria told investigators that her husband Paul had driven her out to the quarry to show her some caves. McCready learned that although they had been married for less than a year, the couple was heavily insured.
As a result of the insurance, it was approximately $80,000 that the victim's wife was a beneficiary of. And all this was obtained within probably 6 months of the killing. So that certainly was suspicious. Very good.
Agent McGarvey asked if the name Glennon Engelman had ever turned up in the initial investigation.
This is what we needed.
Lieutenant McCready told the agent he found a job application Maria had filled out listing Dr. Glennon Engelman as her former employer.
Right here.
At the time of the initial investigation, this meant nothing. But to Agent McGarvey, it seemed like the link he was looking for. It also seemed to prove that Rita Engelman was telling the truth. The details Rita Engelman had given investigators checked out. They had clues to her story, but they still needed hard evidence. Nothing she said brought them any closer to prosecuting her. Special Agent McGarvey knew he needed to speak more with Dennis's ex-wife. He arranged another meeting with Rita. The agents, fearing for Rita's safety, asked her to meet them at a hotel. Her credibility now established, investigators began to take her more seriously.
Gentlemen, this is Rita Engelman. Rita, this is everybody that you're going to be working with.
Rita started to open up, and more horrors came pouring out. She remembered another untimely death that occurred in 1962, just after she and Engelman started dating.
Rita Engelman.
Rita told agents that Engelman had a niece named Sally who had spent some time living with her uncle. Engelman's sister eventually introduced Sally to Ed Franklin, a man she had met in a dance club. Sally and Ed were soon married. Special Agent Bill McGarvey
chose to surround himself with people who were less educated than he was. He was then able to manipulate people into doing things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And in fact, that's really what made the man so dangerous.
Even after her wedding, Sally remained very close to the dentist. Rita told investigators that Engelman began building a drag strip. It was his first and last business venture. Engelman was overseeing the project himself. It was a lot of work, and the dentist needed every hand he could get. He asked Sally's husband, Ed Franklin, to help him with some of the construction. The dentist asked some other men to pitch in, including Jose Montoya. They had discovered an abandoned well on the property. Engelman was afraid someone would fall into it and hurt themselves. He decided to try and collapse it in on itself. The first explosion collapsed only part of the well. Ed Franklin asked Engelman if he could try it, saying he had used dynamite before when he was in the service.
You know, I'm thinking once you use like fire, it's really going to cave in.
You think?
I think so.
All right.
Be careful, man.
I can do that.
You can do it. All right?
All right, tell you what, why don't you head on back with them and I'll get this wired up. It's gonna be a real 4th of July.
I believe you're right.
As Rita's story went, everyone took cover while Franklin prepared the charge. About a minute later, the blast went off. They called out, but Franklin didn't answer. They found him at the bottom of the well. Dr. Engelman pronounced Franklin dead at the scene. After Sally Franklin collected on Ed's life insurance, she paid Engelman $16,000. Rita remembered her saying it was an investment in the drag strip.
Yeah, Pacific drag strip.
The death was investigated and determined to be an accident.
There was about a one-page accidental death report that the Missouri State Patrol completed that day. The main witness that he relied upon, or they relied upon at that time, was Dr. Engelman himself.
The drag strip went bankrupt and was never completed. Rita went on to tell investigators about still another murder. This one involved Barbara Boyle Graham, a woman Engelman had known for more than 20 years. Rita told investigators she first met Barbara at a barbecue. An attractive blonde, Barbara had once lived upstairs from Engelman in his mother's house. It seemed clear to Rita that the divorcee was more than just a friend. Rita told McGarvey that Barbara also lost a husband. Russell Graham was found shot and bludgeoned to death in the back of his car. Rita remembered Engelman confiding to her that he and Barbara were going to kill Russell.
It's almost like he thinks he's God.
At the time we were receiving this information from Mrs. Engelman, it was an unbelievable story, but she had so much detail on each of the cases that she was telling us about that it was enough information that would, if with a little cooperation, we could prove up each case.
McGarvey contacted Bob Hertz at the Madison County Sheriff's Office. Detective Hertz was familiar with the Graham murders. Trouble was, Russell Graham's murder had already been solved. Prison inmate Alan Jackson had confessed to it.
Well, the problem with that is once we obtained the information from Rita that Dr. Engelman had murdered Russell Graham for the reasons that we stated, the confession of Alan Jackson was an obstacle that we had to overcome.
McGarvey wondered why Engelman would tell his ex-wife he had killed Russell. He had to consider the possibility that either Rita or Engelman was lying about the murder. This case was becoming more complex by the day. McGarvey now suspected the dentist of killing people in 5 separate jurisdictions over the past 20 years. If he was going to prove Engelman was a murderer, he would need hard evidence. In St. Louis, a serial killer strikes and vanishes, leaving little evidence in his wake. Blending into the community, he confounds authorities for more than 3 decades. To catch him, police must find his weakness and reveal the true face of the murder. this program, some of the names have been changed. On the evening of Thursday, November 3rd, 1977, two men drove up to an Illinois farmhouse.
Evening, sir. How are you this evening?
Fine.
Okay. You're Mr. Graham, right?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm Bob Beck, and I'm from
While one man waited in the car, the other introduced himself as a representative of the Farmers Union.
Sure, come on in.
Great. My pleasure.
Alan Graham let him into his home. When the men left, two people lay dead. 2 years later, one of the murdered couple's two sons was found in the back of his car in East St. Louis, Illinois. He had been shot. Months later, a woman was killed in a car bomb explosion outside a St. Louis dental lab.
Ow.
Law enforcement was beginning to suspect the murderer might be a St. Louis dentist named Glennon Engelman. They believed he had killed several persons for profit, but they had little direct evidence.
I got the insurance money.
They were trying to prove his involvement by speaking with his ex-wife, Rita. For 2 days, Rita relayed to investigators stories about the killings her ex-husband had confided to her. But Special Agent McGarvey encountered problems in building a case.
The major problem we had was at the time Engelman was telling his wife this information, most of the information, it was during the time that they were married. So because of the marital privilege, almost all of that evidence was inadmissible in court.
Hey.
Hi, Bill.
The agents needed prosecutable evidence against the dentist.
We just don't have enough right now on him to take him to trial.
They had a plan, but it involved considerable risk to the suspect's ex-wife.
So here's what we'd like to do.
Now, he visited her residence to visit the child at least twice a week. Sometimes 3 times a week, sometimes 4 times a week. So he would come over there on a regular occasion. They would still go out to dinner together. And he was a part of the child's life.
They needed to get Engelman's confessions on tape.
There's no way.
And to do that, they would need to wire Rita's condominium with hidden microphones.
There's no way. There is no way I can do that. Hey, you don't know my husband. You don't know my ex-husband. He would kill me if you had.
Whenever Engelman came to visit, investigators wanted Rita to bring up the murders and get him to talk about them. Rita told the agents that Glennon was already paranoid about his conversations being bugged. She feared he might find out. It seemed to her to be a risky proposition.
But we explained to her that if we can get Dr. Engelman to admit to her again some of the things that he admitted to her in the past, that would serve 2 purposes. Number one, it would give us the evidence that we would need, first-hand evidence from Dr. Engelman's mouth that he committed these murders. Number 2, it would bolster her credibility as a witness.
Rita knew the only way she and her son would ever be truly safe was if Glennon Engelman was behind bars. She agreed to cooperate. The agents began to wire her home for sound.
Okay.
McGarvey assured Rita that agents would be nearby in case of an emergency. He felt they should start with the bombing death of Susan Barnes. It was the most recent murder and was still in the news. Rita could then use the Barnes murder to bring up the other killings. McGarvey was asking Rita to put aside her fears of Engelman.
People that are the closest to him, the people that know him the most, are the people that fear him the most. And the reason for that is that, you know, they're aware of what his capabilities are. They're aware that he has no conscience about coming up behind somebody and shooting him in the back of the head, even though he's a friend of his. You know, he'll do that. And the people that are closest to him know that. And that's a lot of the way that he was able to control people.
Investigators set up surveillance outside Rita's condominium. It was the evening of January 20th, 1980.
It's probably cold by now. There's a sandwich too. Anyway, we got all this going here. This is the main monitor.
Agents observed Engelman returning from an outing with his son.
Get ready for bed, okay?
They listened in as Rita brought up the subject of Barnes' murder. Engelman said he had an airtight alibi. He reminded Rita that even if he had built the bomb, he could have had somebody else plant it.
They know that I could have hired somebody else to do it, for all that matters.
There was no mistaking the threat in Engelman's voice. Agents got a sense of how menacing their suspect was.
He was very cagey. He was a very diabolical guy. And he talked a lot about the things that he would do to people. You know, it gave us some insight as to what type of a man that he was and what type of a person we were dealing with.
With Barnes dead, Engelman indicated he was now $14,000 richer.
They wanted 30% court costs above the
The lawsuit would be dropped and he wouldn't have to pay attorney's fees.
that witch.
As the doctor continued, it sounded as if the transmission was breaking up.
Fix it. Tweak it up.
The agents heard an odd scratching sound. They realized it was the family dog pawing at one of their transmitters. The agents feared it might dislodge the bug and Engelman would discover it.
That's what I know.
One of them called Rita to warn her.
Hello?
Rita, Garvey. Yeah, the dog's scratching on transmitter. Stop.
Okay, you the wrong number.
The surveillance had nearly been blown.
No, not the same woman at all.
That danger had passed, but Rita was still in jeopardy.
We were very much concerned about her safety the entire time she was in. She was in extreme risk, and that's not exaggerating. She was in there with a man that, as we knew it at that time, killed people. And we were very, very concerned about her safety.
In the middle of my afternoon's practice.
During the conversation, Engelman had been careful not to take credit for killing Susan Barnes, although he admitted being pleased she was dead. Rita told investigators that she and her ex-husband had made plans to go out for dinner.
Put a transmitter on you.
Knowing her husband's fear the feds may be bugging his conversations, she believed he might be more comfortable talking in a public place.
You're in a public place, and how about
Rita agreed to wear a wire to the restaurant.
Okay, I think that
Engelman had given them little on the car bombing incident. To avoid raising the dentist's suspicions, the agents had to switch topics. They next focused their attention on his other publicized murder. They wanted to get Engelman talking about Ted Baker, who had been shot to death near a St. Louis museum 2 decades earlier. They were concerned the dentist might get suspicious if his ex-wife suddenly brought up a murder that occurred so long ago.
This one over here, that is a cavity, so we'll have him look at that.
They came up with a plan to leak information about Baker's murder to the press.
Get out of my office now!
Doctor,
what's the question for the Tribune? No!
2 reporters and the photographer showed up at Engelman's office and attempted to get a statement from him.
You bloodsuckers, get out!
Special Agent McGarvey continued to use the media to pressure their suspect.
We made arrangements with them without without telling them or going into detail about what we had, and they respected that. But they told us the information that they had, along with the information that we had. They agreed to print stories whenever we wanted stories printed about certain murders.
The next morning, St. Louis residents woke up to learn the dentist was a suspected serial killer. Engelman saw his name on the front page. Reporters were linking him to the Barnes bombing, as well as to the murder of Ted Baker and the death of Ed Franklin with a drag strip.
Now that would give Rita the opportunity to quiz Dr. Engelman on that particular murder without her having to bring it up out of the blue.
No, it's not going to show though, right, at all?
That afternoon, investigators went to Rita's home and fitted her with a miniature transmitter.
Medium rare Dunkin' sauce.
Agents set up electronic surveillance in a parking lot across from the restaurant. The newspaper trick appeared to work. Rita used the article to draw Engelman out about the murders. She asked him how he became such an explosive expert. Engelman replied that he learned from the best, a demolition powder expert from World War II. Engelman was loosening up.
He could stand right over a dynamite charge and said, I was putting this thing together. He kept on saying, I'll tell you one thing, Susan did know. She knew that I was nobody to mess with.
Investigators were encouraged. Engelman had acknowledged he was proficient with explosives.
Okay, you did a really great job worrying.
That was the weapon of choice in the Barnes and Franklin murders.
You know, specific words.
But the
Kill,
dentist
murder.
never admitted killing anything. He had said nothing that would stand up in court. After thinking it over, Rita had an idea. She told investigators that she and her ex-husband were still intimate.
In the bedroom. That's
Engelman often confided secrets to her in the bedroom, she said, after sex. With her consent, technicians set to work bugging Rita's bedroom. As they worked, agents staked out Engelman's dental office. The doctor decided to leave work earlier. Somehow he slipped through their surveillance.
Number one is back. Number one is back. Can you copy? Copy that. Get out here.
Hurry. By the time they spotted Engelman's car, he was nearly at Rita's home. Their whole plan was not in vain.
You have to get lucky, fellas.
Federal agents were wiring Rita Engelman's bedroom with hidden microphones. Their subject, Brennan Engelman, the suspected serial murderer, had somehow slipped their surveillance. An agent picked up the dentist's car and radioed the men in the house to get out. The call had come just in time. Engelman had picked up a present for Brian and wanted to drop it off.
Wow. Wow.
Well, listen, I know you got things to do. So do I. So you get back to what you were doing. I just want to stop and surprise you.
Oh, it was
right?
quite a surprise.
All right, well, enjoy it, kid. All right.
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
Quite a surprise.
Oh, good, good. I'll see you later.
Okay.
We'll come back. Oh, well, thank you.
After Engelman left, the agents went back to work. Technicians hid a recorder inside the headboard and ran the microphone up by the mattress.
Okay. Okay.
They also installed transmitters inside the light switches.
Can you hear it when I do
Special Agent McGarvey assured Rita they would be stationed close by.
anything on that side over there?
we also had a number of agents that were scattered throughout the entire apartment complex where she lived. Now we had to be careful enough so he wouldn't detect the surveillance, but we had to keep it tight enough that we can react in the event something happened within the house, so we can get in there before something occurred.
Even with his agents so close, McGarvey knew Rita Engelman was still in danger. If the dentist were to discover that his ex-wife had betrayed him, that she had violated the sanctity of their bedroom, then Rita's life would be in jeopardy.
What's done is done.
Wasting no time, Rita asked Engelman why he couldn't have settled with Susan Barnes differently, outside of killing her. The dentist did just as Rita and the agents expected. He began to talk freely. Engelman replied that the woman deserved to die, but he maintained that he didn't kill her.
You're just like some needle stuck in a groove. You keep.
When Rita continued to press him about the bombing, Engelman grew angry.
Rita, I don't kill people.
Everybody stand by. All you need to stand by. You might have a problem. That's right.
He said he was beginning to feel that he was in a bugged room.
You're my ex-wife, and you can testify.
And he reminded her that she was not his wife any longer, that she could testify in court against him. And in a very sinister voice, he said, and to be honest with you, Rita, that makes me a little edgy.
He said he was now afraid the police were trying to get to him through her. He said the police may have even bugged the house without her knowing. To protect Rita, they might have to go into the house. As the agents began to mobilize, suddenly Engelman calmed down.
Everybody stand by.
He's going, he's reached the landing, he's opening the door. There he is. There he is. He's leaving.
Rita had survived a close call, but McGarvey didn't want to take any chances.
He's leaving the premise. Everybody stand down. Need everyone to stand up.
He feared that Engelman was now suspicious of his ex-wife, and on the next visit, he might start searching for hidden microphones.
He had wired that condominium with a bunch of sound systems, and he was a pretty handy guy electrically, so he was aware of all the wiring in the house, and he mentioned that to her, that he knows every wire in every corner of the house, and just to let her know that if she was in fact wired or taping him, he was going to find out.
The agents, fearing for Rita's safety, decided to pull the listening devices out of her apartment.
Do you realize?
It was too risky for the two of them to be alone.
And then without ever even suggesting to
Rita continued to work with the agents to ensure that she and her son would be safe from her ex-husband. She spent hours with investigators transcribing the tapes, looking for that one piece of evidence that would put the dentist in jail.
Monday, that's money.
As they pored over the transcripts, the agents felt they needed more.
Ready?
Uh-huh.
And Rita.
Engelman had never admitted any guilt to Rita.
Okay.
With Engelman growing suspicious, McGarvey knew they were running out of time. But he had one last card to play. Again, agents leaked information to the press. The newspaper ran another story linking Engelman to a fourth unsolved murder. This time, it was the 1976 shooting of Paul Henderson at the quarry. They knew Engelman was reticent about talking at Rita's place, and it was too dangerous for she and Engelman to be alone. So Rita called the dentist and got him to invite her out to dinner for Valentine's Day.
Dr. Engelman was a lot more at ease talking outside of the house because he always felt that the feds were bugging his house anyway.
It's loud in there tonight.
Discussing the newspaper article about the Henderson murder, Rita asked Engelman if the victim's wife, Maria Montoya Henderson, got a lot of money. Feeling secure in a public place, the dentist began to talk. Engelman said he received the cash from Maria's brother, Jose. Rita wondered if Jose may have skimmed some of the insurance settlement for himself, but Engelman thought Jose wouldn't dare. He said Jose was aware that he and Carpenter had access to a hitman. Someone who did simple killings for $1,000.
During the course of taping these, we had Rita ask him, what the purpose of all these scams were. And Engelman would tell her the purpose was for money. Money.
Rita expressed concern that Maria might talk. With all the publicity, she was worried about the woman's mental stability. Dr. Engelman was certain that Maria would never talk. He said they shared a bond stronger than sexual intimacy. Engelman believed Maria would never reveal their secret. They had been, in his words, homicidally intimate. Agents suspected this meant the two of them had conspired to murder Paul Henderson. It was the admission of guilt they had been waiting for. For months, investigators have been collecting evidence linking Dr. Glennon Engelman to a series of murders. Fearful that it was too dangerous to continue taping his conversations, they wanted to see if they had enough to prosecute. To determine whether they had a case, Special Agent McGarvey played the tapes of Engelman's conversations for State Prosecutor Gordon Anthony.
There's no doubt when you listen to this man talk about the homicidal intimacy of killing people, that this is not someone that you want out on the street.
Background noise made it difficult to hear some of the words. Referring to the transcripts, Ankney focused on a key passage. Engelman was telling Rita he had no driving urgency to get rid of his fellow man.
As we went through that area, we looked at it thinking, well, that's he's saying he didn't do it. And we thought, well, wow, this doesn't help us, because right in the middle of all this, he's saying he has no urge to kill people. But we heard something in there that there was another word in there. We went back and we listened.
We could probably even get this tape cleaned up.
As they replayed the tape, they heard a word the transcriptionist had missed. Engelman was in fact saying he had no driving urgency to keep getting rid of his fellow man.
I have no driving urgency.
The conversations pointed to Engelman's guilt. Prosecutors felt their strongest case against Dr. Engelman was the shooting death of Paul Henderson at the quarry. It was the only homicide the dentist had admitted taking part in. Although the evidence was weak, prosecutors felt they had to act immediately. And they knew it wasn't safe for their key witness to stay in St. Louis. Rita Engelman and her son were given new identities and placed in the Federal Witness Relocation Program. They would begin a new life in a distant city. The tapes were powerful, but by themselves, they would not be enough to convict Engelman. To make a convincing case, they would need direct evidence, the testimony of Engelman's accomplices.
We had to do something, but we needed a witness. And so it was our belief that if we had them all arrested, we could tell them that the doc is in jail and under arrest. They didn't have to fear him.
Because Engelman's conspirators did not actually pull the trigger, investigators felt they might get one of them to talk. Police acquired arrest warrants for Engelman and the three persons mentioned in connection with the murders of the tapes. Bill Carpenter, Jose Montoya, and his sister Maria.
Our strategy was to arrest all four of them simultaneously. Our reasoning was to keep them separated so they couldn't talk to one another or couldn't call one another, and arrest them all at the same time on a specific date.
If any one of the suspects heard about the other's arrest, they could run and the case might be lost. At the appointed time, all the agents headed out to make the arrests. On February 24th, 1980, agents arrested Dr. Engelman for the capital murder of Paul Henderson at the quarry.
Good warrant for your arrest.
Bill Carpenter, Engelman's closest friend, was arrested at his home. Rita had implicated him in several of the murders. John McCready questioned Carpenter later in jail.
He's being arrested at this very moment.
When we told him that Engelman was served with a capital murder warrant, I thought he was going to pass out. I mean, he really, like somebody hit him in the head with a ton of bricks. I mean, and then all of a sudden he wanted to clam up. So I don't know anything about anything.
With Carpenter refusing to talk, investigators pinned their hopes on Jose Montoya and his sister.
Police, come out here. Step out. Hands on the wall right now.
Unless they could get one of them to cooperate, they wouldn't have much of a case. As they drove to the station, Jose heard on the police radio that they were looking for his sister. In California, Maria's last known address, police reported they were unable to locate her.
California, huh? Yep. That's amazing. She's not there, though. What are you talking about? She's at my house. You just left her back there.
To ensure Maria didn't get away, they immediately drove back to Jose's house and picked her up.
I don't know anything.
Don't be. Watch your step. No te preocupes. Here's your sister. No te preocupes.
What are we gonna do?
Maria rode with her brother to the police station.
Okay, it's okay. Fine.
The plan to arrest them separately had failed.
And it's exactly what we did want to happen. We wanted them separated from the get-go so that they wouldn't be able to talk. And what happened was Jose told her, I'll take care of this. I'll do the talking. You keep your mouth shut.
All the way into the station, neither Jose nor Maria spoke to the police. Carpenter was refusing to talk, so Jose and his sister were the government's only options. On February 24th, 1980, agents interviewed them separately. It was clear from the tapes that Jose knew about the murders. McGarvey told him they were going to prosecute Jose and his sister. The agent offered him a deal. Jose's testimony for Maria's life. She would get 22 years for conspiracy to murder.
You don't have anything. Now, if you want something, I want full immunity for me and my sister Maria.
Jose insisted on immunity for both of them. Prosecutors were faced with a difficult decision.
How's it going?
They suspected Maria had helped Engelman plot her husband's murder.
Well, look, you're gonna have to do something.
They rankled at the idea of letting her walk free, but without the testimony of a witness, Prosecutor Ankney knew they wouldn't have a case.
She deserved to go to prison, but we didn't have a case. If we didn't have somebody flip on the dock that night, we probably didn't have a case on anybody, because we couldn't use the tape. Was not enough to make the dock. The tapes couldn't be used against Jose or Maria or Bill Carpenter. They weren't saying anything. You couldn't use them without the person saying them. So we would have been dead in the water.
I want you to tell him that.
Investigators felt trapped. They needed someone to talk if they ever hoped to convict Engelman. Jose was their only chance. Without him, the dentist might get off scot-free. The government was trying to build their case against a dentist they suspected of killing more than 5 persons in a series of murder-for-profit schemes. Investigators needed the cooperation of Jose Montoya, a close friend of their suspect. Jose refused to talk without a guarantee of immunity for himself and his sister, the widow of one of the victims. If he made the deal, Prosecutor Gordon Ankney would be letting 2 conspirators to murder walk free.
We gave him a pass, and we gave Maria a pass, and for both of them to testify against the doc. It was the only way we were going to prosecute the doc and make him. And although it wasn't a deal we wanted to make, it was a deal we felt we had to make.
Statement in.
Jose told investigators he had known Engelman since he was a young man. He'd been involved in numerous business dealings with the dentist, many of which were illegal. Engelman believed the only way to get ahead in life was through crime. His motto was, always plan your crime from the witness stand back. Jose said he had heard about the shooting death of his sister's husband after the fact. Lieutenant John McCready remembers Jose told him his first thought was that Engelman had done it.
The reason that he knew this is because he was associated with Engelman for many, many years and had information relating to other crimes that Engelman had committed. And he knew of Engelman's violence and that he had the capabilities of murder, because he claims that Engelman had done several murders that he had direct knowledge of.
Investigators needed to corroborate Jose's story. They would now question his sister, Maria Montoya Henderson. They wanted her to tell them how Engelman had drawn her into a plot to kill her husband. Maria said she had known the dentist all her life. She admired and respected him. Engelman trained her as a dental assistant and gave her a job, but she always had money problems.
Suggestion that you might want to consider.
One morning as she was setting up, he told her he had a solution.
Like yourself,
marry a man who would collect on his life insurance. To Maria,
that would
didn't
take so
seem
long
realistic.
for him to die.
She'd have to wait a long time for him to die.
I've done it before. Sounds
Not so,
crazy,
said
but
he would kill
it's
him.
done a lot. I've done it before. Just ask Jose. If I can
Madison
only do
County
that for you,
Prosecutor Donald Weber believes Engelman looked for a certain type of woman.
Much like a child molester will know which children are vulnerable, Glenn Engelman knew which women would easily succumb to his plans.
Maria didn't believe Engelman was serious at first, but she believed he wanted to help her.
He's a smart guy. He's been through school and all over the world.
Engelman was a professional and had an education, she said, and she trusted him. Each morning they would talk about it. Engelman told Maria to marry a man who worked for a big company with insurance benefits. Once they were married, he and Bill Carpenter would kill her husband. Weber believes Engelman chose his male victims carefully.
They had to be simple people with good jobs. The jobs had to have good death benefits. They had to be naturally males, and they had to be susceptible to being taken in by these black widow spiders that he put out to ensnare them.
Yes, I had a picture of Paul up, and he would ask about him, what he did. And
Maria said Engelman seemed pleased when she told him she'd begun dating Paul Henderson.
Is this the one?
Yes, that's Paul.
Paul Henderson.
Paul worked for the phone company, which had generous insurance benefits.
It's okay.
To get a man to propose anytime she wants.
Maria had known him since high school, and the two were soon engaged.
It really just showed you how to.
And after they got married, she said that the doctor kept saying, stay in touch with me, Dr. Engelman, stay in touch with me, because once you're in and you get these insurance policies, all they need new policies or become beneficiary of the present policies, then I'll kill them.
Maria revealed that Engelman and Carpenter started planning the murder as soon as she was married. Then, just before the couple's first anniversary, the dentist drove her out to the site and rehearsed it. The following Sunday, Maria talked Paul into going on a picnic with her at the quarry. She almost had to drag him there. As Maria ran back up the trail to get help, Engelman surprised her. He told her to be quiet and calm down.
Done. Now, go get help. Go.
She felt that Engelman had committed all these murders over the course of 22 years, have never gotten caught. And she felt that if she followed his advice, followed his direction, the fact that he didn't get caught, she would never get caught either. And she believed that what she was doing was a way for her to get ahead.
Your portion?
he took care of it. Jose had both of them put it into businesses, like I said.
Okay. In the end, Maria wouldn't take the money. Her brother Jose handled the payoff to Engelman and kept the rest for himself. Their mother never got her house.
Statement ends on February 25th, 1980 at 4 a.m.
With Maria's testimony, investigators felt they had enough evidence to prosecute Dr. Engelman for murder. Now they had to convince a jury.
I think we got enough. We got enough to go to trial.
After 2 months of investigating Dr. Glennon Engelman for the bombing death of Susan Barnes, the agents finally had him in custody. The dentist's selfish pursuit of pleasure and money had left a trail of suffering in his wake, which spanned nearly 3 decades.
His actual reason for killing people was the fact that he enjoyed the game. He enjoyed killing people, and he enjoyed getting away with it. He enjoyed planning it. He enjoyed carrying it out. He particularly enjoyed getting over on the police and getting away with it for as long as he had. He looked at it like it was a challenge, like it was a game for him. He actually, he killed people for sport.
Investigators had put an end to the dentist's murderous spree, and prosecutors felt they had enough evidence to try Glennon Engelman for the 4-year-old shooting death of Paul Henderson at a quarry outside the city. As Gordon Ankney prepared the case, he struggled to establish the credibility of his witnesses, especially the victim's widow, Maria Montoya.
I mean, we had a hard time with the fact that our key witnesses were all somewhat involved in criminal activity, and one of them, the key witness, was a woman who married a man to have him killed for insurance proceeds, which she got, and she was walking away, and that could create doubt or a problem in convicting anybody.
In September of 1980, Engelman's first murder trial began in Jefferson City, Missouri. Prosecutor Ankney needed a witness to identify the voices on the tapes. The defendant's ex-wife, Rita, came out of hiding to testify. Now living under an assumed name in the federal witness relocation
My name's Rita
program,
Engelman.
she was carefully shielded from the
I'm
media.
39 years old.
Portions of the tapes were played for the jury.
And identify to the jury, if you can, any voices.
Tapes that hinted at Dr. Engelman's involvement in the murder.
Now, Mrs. Engelman, can you identify the voices on the tape?
Yes, I can. One of them is me.
And can you identify the male voice on the tape?
The male voice was Glenn Engelman.
Glenn Engelman, the defendant.
Yes.
As the trial progressed, Glennon Engelman took the stand in his own defense.
Dr. Engelman, how
In
can you explain the
cross-examination,
implied
Ankney asked the
confession of
defendant to
homicide?
explain what he meant by having homicidal intimacy with Maria Montoya. As Engelman began to explain, he started to become angry.
That I had the capability of being involved in a homicide. I mean,
Thank you, you've answered my question.
would you let me finish this?
Thank you, you've answered my
His
question.
anger quickly built into rage. The jury saw a transformation take place.
That's wonderful. I mean, that's just wonderful. The way that
His whole demeanor changed, and his voice changed. It was no longer the soft-spoken dentist. This was a man who killed people, and you could see it in the courtroom.
The mask of civility fell away, and they saw the face of a killer. Engelman had sealed his own fate. The taped evidence, coupled with the testimony of Jose and Maria, was enough to convince the jury. After deliberating for 55 minutes, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Engelman was sentenced to life in prison. His accomplice, Bill Carpenter, received 17 years. The dentist was also tried and convicted for the bombing death of Susan Barnes. He received another life sentence. Prosecutors believed they could link Engelman to at least 3 more murder victims. Justice demanded that they continue searching for evidence. Prosecutors suspected Engelman was involved in the shooting death of Alan and Velma Graham at their farmhouse 3 years earlier. They also believed he was implicated in the murder of their son, Russell Graham. But prosecutors had a problem. Someone else had already confessed to the murder of the son. Alan Jackson was sitting in prison when in 1979, he confessed to killing Russell Graham.
Russell Graham. Oh, yes.
Special Agent McGarvey felt the police had the wrong man.
They were already convinced that they had the murderer, in Alan Jackson. It's at that time we provided them with some evidence, with the tapes and some inconsistencies about Alan Jackson's confession.
Sergeant Dennis Kuba of the Illinois Department of Criminal Investigation drove Jackson to the place where Graham's body was discovered and asked him to show them where he had parked Graham's car.
And he couldn't do that. He took us to Coleman's Plaza, and he pointed to an area where he thought the car was parked, but it was completely on the wrong side of the building.
Now police were convinced Alan Jackson did not murder Russell Graham. Under his second interrogation, his story began to crumble. He said he'd been forced to confess. He claimed a corrupt police detective looking for a quick promotion had given him the police reports on the murder of Russell Graham and threatened to harm his family if he didn't confess. With Jackson's confession discredited, the way was now clear to prosecute Engelman and his suspected accomplice Barbara Boyle Graham for Russell Graham's murder. Barbara was the victim's widow. She collected a small fortune from her husband's life insurance policies upon his death. She was a very close friend of Glenn and Engelman's. If investigators were going to prove Barbara Boyle Graham was involved in the death of her husband, they knew they would have to make a deal. Detective Bob Hertz.
At that point, we knew that we needed somebody who could tell the exact story. You know, you like to do that in any case through either victims, which we had none that could tell the story, witnesses, which we had none. So at that point, in order to tell the story, you have to deal with one of the participants.
From the moment Bill Carpenter had been arrested, he had stubbornly refused to talk to investigators. Besides Carpenter and Engelman, the only other person implicated in the Graham murder was Barbara Boyle Graham, and she was a free woman. Carpenter was their only hope. Prosecutor Donald Weber went out to the prison and made a pitch.
He said, I'm the state's attorney in Madison County. We know that you were involved in the murder of Russell, and we're here to talk to you to see if you want to make a deal with us. Now, I want to tell you that I have the discretion to decide who gets the death penalty and who doesn't.
Weber offered Carpenter a deal. He would not face the death penalty. In return for Carpenter's testimony, he could plead guilty to 3 counts of conspiracy to murder. The most he would serve was 14 years concurrent with his present sentence. Faced with the evidence, Carpenter turned on his old friend and Barbara Boyle Graham. He remembered first hearing about the scheme at Engelman's office. Barbara dropped by saying she had met an oil refinery worker named Russell Graham. They were planning to get married, she said. Engelman advised her to take out more insurance on Russell than he would kill him for her.
When Barbara married Russell, she knew that she wasn't signing a wedding certificate, she was signing a death warrant. She knew she was going to run up these small insurance policies, and she knew that once she did, that Russell was going to be murdered. She knew all that. Going into the wedding, she knew that there would be a funeral shortly thereafter.
Carpenter went on to describe how he and Engelman and Barbara waited inside Russell's garage. Engelman shot Russell, then struck him in the head with a 3-pound sledgehammer. This was a big break for investigator Dennis Kuba.
Opened the garage door.
We didn't know about Russell being killed in his garage. That was the first time we ever heard that. So we went back to see what we could do.
As Carpenter described the slaying, there had been a great deal of blood. Investigators hoped some trace of it remained and that they could find it years after the crime. By this time, Barbara had moved away. Agents got permission from the new owner to examine the garage. They sprayed the interior with luminol, a chemical that reacts with blood proteins. The evidence glowed like a signpost from beyond the grave.
No,
On August 10, 1985, 4.5 years after Russell's murder, investigators located Barbara Boyle Graham on vacation in Lauderdale-by-the-Sea, Florida. When officers arrested her, they found she was carrying her passport and was planning a trip to Europe. Still aware of what was going on in St. Louis and suspecting police were closing in on her, she was poised to leave the country. Special Agent McGarvey believes Carpenter's cooperation was crucial to putting Barbara behind bars.
She was convicted of the murder of her husband, and she was given a sentence of 50 years. She's now serving.
Engelman had already spent 5 years in prison for the bombing death of Susan Barnes and the murder of Paul Henderson. He was serving 60 years plus 2 consecutive life sentences. He had not received the death penalty for his previous convictions, but the prosecution was seeking to sentence him to death for the murder of the Grahams. On June 19, 1985, he agreed to plead guilty to killing Russell Graham and his parents to avoid the death penalty.
Engelman actually explained himself rather well once. He said that a lot of people have various talents. There are architects, there are lawyers, there are judges. He said he had a particular talent. The talent that he had was that he could murder without any remorse and in cold blood. And he felt that it was that inherent talent that he had to murder without remorse that would make him rich. And he proceeded on this course to make a business out of murder.
Dr. Glennon Engelman's murderous business came to an end when he was caught and convicted of killing 5 people. He is suspected of at least 2 more deaths. Glennon Engelman died in prison in 1999 at the age of 71. A vicious killer roams the country, taking his victims wherever he finds them. He strikes in cities hundreds of miles apart, then vanishes. Police are forced to rely on few clues as they reconstruct his trail of murder and embark on a dangerous pursuit. In this program, some of the names have been changed. Palm Beach, Florida is a vacationer's paradise. Its upscale resorts and beautiful beaches attract tourists looking for adventure and romance. In the fall of 1974, while visiting Palm Beach, Sarah Mitchell met a man named Darrell Gordon, a self-proclaimed restaurateur. On November 14th, Mitchell's new friend offered to give her a ride to an appointment. The next morning, while they were on their way, Darrell pulled the car to the side of the road. He said he was having car trouble and got out to check under the hood. When Sarah asked him about the trouble, he pointed a pistol at her. He forced her out of the car and started dragging her towards the woods.
No! I am... Darrell, what are you doing? Let go of me! Darrell!
Sarah Mitchell struggled free and ran towards a couple who had moments earlier pulled to the side of the road.
Daryl, he pulled a gun at me.
Darrell drove off. Sarah Mitchell was taken to the Palm Beach police station where she gave a detailed description of the man who tried to abduct her and the Chevy he was driving.
We had car trouble. I don't know what happened. We stopped.
The police put out an APB on the car. An officer on routine patrol received word to be on the lookout for a red Chevy Impala. The driver was wanted for attempting to abduct a woman at gunpoint only hours earlier.
Dispatch, this is car 17, be advised.
When the officer spotted the car, he turned on his lights. The Impala pulled to the side of the road. As the officer got out of the car, the driver surprised him. West Palm Beach Detective James Gabbard.
The officer got out to confront him or to find out what was going on, and he came out of the car with a sawed-off shotgun and pointed at the officers and basically had the drop on the policeman.
In the brief instant while the officer took cover below the dashboard, the suspect sped off.
Before the officer could get his vehicle going again, he had lost sight of him.
The Palm Beach officer radioed he was in pursuit and requested backup. Cars were immediately dispatched to the area.
HQ all units, HQ all units.
Police swarmed over the neighborhood searching for the red Chevy Impala. The driver had a head start. He eventually found an empty carport and hid the car underneath. Police didn't know their suspect was now on foot. He was searching for a place to hide out. He found it at the home of Darlene Matthews. Matthews, who suffers from cerebral palsy, shared her modest home in West Palm Beach with her sister. Because of the nature of the crime, Darlene Matthews has asked that her identity remain hidden.
I was in the backyard hanging up the clothes, and I was bringing the clothes in, and somebody came up behind me.
The stranger told her his name was Bob Williams and he was with the IRS.
Yeah, if I could just take a look at it.
Have a good day.
Matthews didn't believe him, but it was too late. There was nothing she could do.
He tried to follow me, and I tried to pull the door closed before he, could get in. And he put his foot in the door, and he pushed the door, and he said, "Don't you dare try to touch it." And then he kind of pushed me aside, and he just came in with me.
He pointed his gun at her and told her not to panic. He said he had just committed a robbery and needed a place to hide out until the police search for him cooled down.
He said to me, "If you scream or anything, I'll just blow you away."
Matthews was terrified.
He said, "Who's here with you? Who stays with you?" And I said, "My sister works at a radio station. She's a copywriter." Well, and he said, "What time is she coming home?" And I said, "Probably between 5 and 5:30 after she picks her son up from nursery school."
He then bound and tied Matthews. He assured her again if she cooperated, she would not be hurt.
I didn't think he would leave before my sister showed up because he needed a way to get out to, go from our house to the next crime he was going to do. He had to have that car.
After Knowles tied Matthews, contrary to his word, he terrorized and assaulted her. As 5 o'clock approached, he went out to wait for Matthews' sister to return with her car. In the meantime, the West Palm Beach police located the red Chevy Impala. They found no sign of the driver. Technicians immediately began processing the vehicle. The first thing they noticed was the car's New Mexico plates.
The car was not in the computer at the time. We had to call out to New Mexico and find out what the status of the car and where the owner was and that kind of thing before we were able to determine that it was actually a stolen plate.
Inside, police found a pistol. It appeared to be the same gun Sarah Mitchell described her attacker using when he tried to abduct her by the side of the road. Police were convinced it was the same car used in the attack. While police processed the Impala, several blocks away, Darlene Matthews' sister arrived home. Deborah Taylor had no way of knowing what awaited her inside the house. When she entered with her son, the intruder put a gun in her face and pointed her towards the room where her sister was bound. Deborah Taylor has also asked that her identity remain hidden.
And everything just happened so fast. There was a man beside me. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't turn around or I'll kill you." I wasn't crying at that time. I was calm. It was like, it was so unreal to me.
Okay? Then we'll let you go.
I said, "I just cashed my paycheck." I said, "I have money in my drawer in my bedroom." And I said, "I'll give you the money and I'll give you the keys to my car." I said, "Just don't hurt us."
He then forced Deborah Taylor outside at gunpoint. He was going to make his getaway, but he wasn't going to do it alone.
He said, "We're going to Georgia together." And I said, "Well, you know, you don't need me all the time, you know, all this time." And he said, "Yes, I do."
A half hour after Deborah Taylor's Volkswagen pulled away, Taylor's son was able to free himself. He went to the neighbor's house and she called police. Investigators arrived within minutes. Matthews described her ordeal and gave police a description of her attacker. The description matched the driver of the Chevy Impala. Matthews was extremely concerned for the safety of her sister and begged police to find her.
Well, we knew that this individual was desperate, obviously, trying to get away, and taking someone with you is very serious. It's not just like leaving and trying to get away. He's actually taken a potential hostage and kidnapped someone, and also tied up two other individuals, the juvenile son and the sister, and left there. We immediately began to take steps to try to locate that vehicle.
The West Palm Beach police mobilized. They hit the streets and disseminated the description of their suspect in Deborah Taylor's car.
We sent out teletypes and information to all the surrounding law enforcement agencies. We contacted the FBI because it was obviously a kidnapping case, which gave the FBI authority, and they could certainly assist us with lots of manpower.
Now that this case involved kidnapping, the FBI immediately dispatched agents from the Palm Beach office.
Sir, this is Agent Palm Beach GBI.
When investigators learned their suspect had a captive, they knew they might need a hostage negotiator. Agent James Kavanaugh joined the investigation.
I was called because I was the hostage negotiator
and I also do the abnormal profiling for abnormal behavior for the FBI in that area. So responded to the police department to work with their detectives.
Police continued processing the Impala. They hoped it held some clue to where their suspect might be taking his hostage. Police ran the VIN number on the car to try and confirm the identity of the driver. West Palm Beach forensic technician Greg Parkinson supervised the search of the car.
Using the vehicle identification number on the frame, we searched that through the National Crime Information Center.
The car was registered to a man named Richard Evans from Lima, Ohio. The West Palm Beach police contacted Detective Jim Ketchum in Lima, Ohio to run a check on the owner of the car. Ketchum told the investigators in Florida that Richard Evans and his car had been missing for several weeks. In an effort to find him, the detective had been tracking his credit card receipts.
We started tracing that activity through the credit card companies and the different areas it was being used, different states. We tracked approximately 37 different states where his card had been used.
Ketchum went on to tell the Florida investigators the signatures on the credit card receipts didn't match Evans' handwriting. The detective in Lima, Ohio, gave the West Palm Beach police a description of the missing Richard Evans. It did not match their suspect. The investigators traced the name Darrell Gordon. The real Darrell Gordon was alive and well, but had discovered his credit card was missing a few weeks earlier. He reported it stolen. Police surmised their suspect had stolen the card and assumed Gordon's identity. None of this information brought the authorities any closer to finding their suspect. The technicians continued to focus their attention on the car. Investigators found some record albums, jewelry, newspaper articles, and several items of clothing, including some with labels from a men's store in Macon, Georgia. On the back seat, Greg Parkinson made a significant discovery.
The vehicle literally became an evidence treasure trove. We discovered a document that was a last will and testament that had been dated 1 or 2 days prior to the incident. The name of Paul John Knowles was the name on that document.
The investigators believed they had finally found the real name of their suspect. They ran a background check.
We had the name Paul John Knowles, ran him through the FBI system and the Florida state system, which gave us his identification record for all his arrests and gave us photographs.
Detectives took the photographs to Darlene Matthews to confirm the identification.
You're certain that's him?
West Palm Beach Detective James Griffin.
And she immediately picked out Mr. Knowles as the individual that had been in her home and had tied her up and attempted rape, and as the individual that kidnapped her sister.
While police were beginning to learn all they could about Paul John Knowles, he and his hostage, Deborah Taylor, drove into the night. Taylor was terrified. As the Volkswagen headed away from West Palm Beach, Knowles was continually scanning the radio, trying to keep up with the news coverage.
When we were driving along and after he heard the news, he started getting agitated. And I thought, uh-oh, this man has more than one personality, and I don't like this other side. He's starting to scare me.
Deborah Taylor didn't know she had good reason to fear her captor. Paul John Knowles was a killer. The FBI and police in West Palm Beach, Florida, were tracking a man who assaulted 2 women and abducted another. It had been several hours since Deborah Taylor was forced from her West Palm Beach home at gunpoint. As police tried to locate her, they widened their search perimeter. Investigators knew very little about their suspect, only that his name was Paul John Knowles and he was driving a brown Volkswagen Bug. The most important piece of information they had was the knowledge that they had to find him soon. FBI agent James Cavanaugh.
We put out a nationwide alert for that car with that license plate and the fact that it was involved in a kidnapping. We also, at that time, did grid searches in the entire city of West Palm Beach trying to find that vehicle and the surrounding cities.
Hours before Paul John Knowles abducted Deborah Taylor, he abandoned a stolen Chevy Impala in West Palm Beach. Forensic investigators pored over the car, looking for anything that might be a clue or help them understand their suspect. Agent Cavanaugh began to develop a psychological profile of Paul John Knowles.
And I had obtained a rap sheet for Knowles, which showed a variety of offenses that cover the gambit of everything from simple assault to murder and kidnapping, car theft, which is what we use in the profiling.
For Agent Cavanaugh, Knowles' profile presented a frightening image.
We assumed, based on the number of items that we're finding in the car, the variety of names, the travel interstate of a number of states, that this was not going to be the typical kidnapping, the typical abduction. And that is the reason I was called to start with, because it looked like we were going to start dealing with a serial killer.
The only hard evidence the police in West Palm Beach, Florida had to work with was a stolen Chevy Impala. The Impala was traced to a missing man in Lima, Ohio. Since the police discovered the car, Florida investigators had been working closely with Lima detective Jim Ketchum. In the course of investigating the missing persons case involving Richard Evans, Detective Jim Ketchum discovered an abandoned yellow Dodge Demon outside a hotel in Lima. When he ran the VIN number on the car, he learned it was registered to a Florida woman who had been murdered in her Jacksonville Beach home.
In checking the car, I noticed that it appeared that somebody had been in the car quite a bit. There were coffee cups and sandwich wrappers and all kinds of stuff in the car. So I went on the process for latent prints. I took a latent lift of a thumbprint from the headlight switch.
The West Palm Beach, Florida police forwarded Detective Ketchum Paul John Knowles' criminal record, including his fingerprints. When Ketchum compared them against the prints from the Dodge Demon, they matched. Paul John Knowles was now linked to 2 stolen cars, a missing man's Chevy Impala from Ohio, and a murdered woman's Dodge Demon from Jacksonville Beach, Florida.
With the information that West Palm Beach had given me, I contacted Jacksonville Beach by telephone, advised them that we had recovered what we believe was their stolen vehicle.
Several weeks earlier, the yellow Dodge Demon had been stolen from the home of a woman named Emily Carter. She had been found murdered in her bedroom. The evidence found at the scene of the crime suggested on the night of July 26, 1974, an intruder cut the screen on one of her first-floor windows. Emily Carter was a school teacher. Police surmised the intruder must have awakened her. After he killed her, He took her money. Then he took her car. The next morning, the Jacksonville Beach, Florida police learned of the murder when the woman's son discovered his mother's body. He offered police no solid leads. Her son had no idea why anyone would want to harm his mother. Homicide detectives and forensic technicians processed the home. Jacksonville Beach Police Detective John English.
The officers at the scene checked the house. They found no room disturbed except the bedroom. The deceased, she was bound and gagged and had tape on her.
The crime appeared to be a burglary, but the level of violence was excessive. Whoever committed this crime had come not only to steal, he was a vicious killer. Investigators processed the remainder of the house. They dusted the window and cut screen for prints. They found nothing. All they knew was that the killer brutalized the victim, then took some money and her car. A 1971 yellow Dodge Demon. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined Emily Carter died of asphyxiation from the gag forced in her mouth. The police in Lima, Ohio and West Palm Beach, Florida, now had evidence linking Paul John Knowles to murder. With the evidence that Paul John Knowles was a murderer, police intensified the manhunt. As the Volkswagen headed north, Knowles and his hostage continued to outrun the police dragnet. Trying desperately to keep Knowles calm, Deborah Taylor continued trying to make conversation.
Whatever came out of our mouths all the way on the trip there was nothing but small talk, and he asked me what I did, and I told him I worked in radio, and he said, well, what do you do in radio? I heard you're a writer or something. I said, yes, I'm a copywriter. He said, oh, you know how to write? And I said, yes, and he said, good. He said, this is good.
Knowles seemed curious about Taylor's writing skills and pressed her for information.
He said, well, you think you know how to write a book? And I said, sure. He said, that's good. He said, because that's what's probably going to happen. He said, you're going to be able to help me write my story. And he says, I'll tell you later what it's all about.
As more time passed and the search for Knowles and Deborah Taylor widened, investigators began to fear for her life.
When we first heard of the kidnapping of Deborah Taylor, we had learned enough about Paul John Knowles to feel that there was not going to be that much hope of finding her alive.
As the search for Paul John Knowles and his hostage continued, the FBI uncovered more information about his past. Investigators learned of another Florida case that was apparently linked to their suspect. On August 1st, 1974, at 8:15 p.m., Jacksonville investigators responded to a frantic call. Kathy Johnson reported her two young daughters, Laura and Melissa, missing. Earlier, she left the girls alone when she was suddenly called away to tend to a sick relative. She told the police that she only intended to be away for less than an hour. She expected her husband, a commercial fisherman, to return home soon.
Don't go in my room.
Detective Tommy Reeves.
As it happened, the husband did not get off on time. For some reason, they were having engine problems on the boat and could not get home on time.
Mrs. Johnson called to check in on the girls and spoke to them around 6:30 p.m. Her husband was expected any minute. He returned home at 7 o'clock.
When he got home, he realized the two little girls were not there. They had disappeared.
There was no sign of forced entry in the house and no sign of a struggle. Police hoped the girls had only wandered off. They began to comb the area around their home. As the search broadened, no trace of either of the girls was found. It seemed they had simply vanished.
A search was organized that covered the general area around there. The woods were searched. Police helicopters were utilized. The motorized units were searched the woods and any areas where they might be, and they were not able to find the little girls.
Police asked neighbors whether they had seen anything unusual. One of them told the officers they had noticed a yellow car outside the house the day the girls disappeared. It appeared that Knowles was a kidnapper and a murderer. His victims included men, women, and children. The search to find him intensified. Knowles and his hostage, Deborah Taylor, continued to elude police. Taylor, frightened by Knowles' mood swings, made a decision to calmly keep talking with her captor.
So I started talking about the weather and anything that would come into my mind to get his mind off of that newscast. And it worked. It worked. I had to do that from West Palm Beach to Fort Pierce, and that was over 70 miles.
After hours of driving, Knowles became tired and wanted to stop for the night.
We arrived in Fort Pierce, and he noticed a motel up kind of like on a little hill, and he said, "We're going to stay here for the night." And he said, "I'm just too tired. And then we'll head on in the morning to Georgia." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "We're married." Well, he says, "I'll think of a name when we get to the front desk." He said, "I'll think of a name." He said, "But we're married." And he said, "We're newlyweds."
Knowles checked them into the hotel under an assumed name. It seemed like the perfect place to hide out until the police search died down. Florida authorities had searched for hours trying to capture an armed man who abducted a woman from West Palm Beach. Their suspect was driving a brown Volkswagen. As each hour went by, the FBI and the West Palm Beach police widened their dragnet. Investigators now had compelling evidence that Paul John Knowles, the man they sought, had murdered a schoolteacher in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. They also suspected him in the abduction and possible murder of 2 missing girls in a neighboring town. Police in the Jacksonville area were still searching for the girls who disappeared from their home a few weeks earlier. The FBI was quickly gathering information on their suspect's past crimes, but he continued to elude them. The more they learned, the more concerned investigators became for the safety of his hostage, Deborah Taylor. As the FBI circulated the information they had on Knowles throughout the Jacksonville, Florida area, leads began pouring in. Agents learned the day after the little girls disappeared from their Jacksonville home, a woman named Margaret Hayes had been killed in a quiet suburb of Jacksonville called Atlantic Beach. The same day the woman was found murdered in her home, one of her neighbors gave police an important piece of information.
Well, thanks for calling.
According to the neighbor, on the day Margaret Hayes was murdered, a man knocked on her door looking for someone named Betty Johnson. But she refused to open it. Detective Tommy Reeves worked the case.
And she said that he stood there for a moment, and then he walked off, and he walked back toward the car that he'd left parked. She watched him through the house, get into the car and drive off. As he was leaving, she noticed a little something on the back, some sort of a decal on the back of the car.
The neighbor described the man as a white male, 30 years old, approximately 6 feet tall with light brown hair. The neighbor went on to describe the car he was driving, a yellow Dodge with a distinctive red demon painted on the side. It was the same car taken from Emily Carter's home in Jacksonville Beach.
I had already talked to the Jacksonville Beach detectives and the Atlantic Beach detectives. Having this information on the car with the Dodge Demon on it, we pretty well had it established that Paul John Knowles had done those two cases.
The information that a yellow car was also seen at the Johnson home before the two girls disappeared gave investigators every indication the three cases were tied together. At autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed Margaret Hayes' murder was similar to the murder of the schoolteacher in Jacksonville Beach. Both women had been bound and gagged. They had both been found nude, and they had been robbed. A television and a rifle were reported stolen from the Hayes home. The FBI now had proof they were dealing with a serial killer. They expanded their search and distributed photos of Knowles to law enforcement agencies all over the Southeast. As forensic technicians continued to process the red Chevy Impala, the contents of the car and Knowles' arrest record confirmed FBI investigator James Cavanaugh's worst fears.
It appeared that he was an interstate traveler. He had a car from one place, a license plate from another place, credit card receipts and names from all over. So he had been on the road. We knew he had been traveling extensively. And then the agreement and the items we found in the trunk led credence to this was probably a serial killer that was just traveling the United States.
As each hour passed, police became more concerned for Deborah Taylor. They feared if they didn't find her soon, they might not find her alive. While officers combed the Florida highways searching for Knowles, FBI agents studied his past. They learned he had been a career criminal with a series of burglary convictions. He'd been arrested after getting into a bar fight, the same night Emily Carter was killed. But he escaped from the holding cell in Jacksonville. When he fled, he left behind his personal effects confiscated by the Jacksonville police at the time of his arrest. Among those effects, police found an address book filled with names and addresses of his friends and family. The agents located and began questioning the people listed in the book. None of Knowles' acquaintances had seen him in the past few weeks. Agents also learned Knowles' family lived in Jacksonville. None of his family members had seen him either. In studying his credit card receipts found in the Impala, the FBI learned which types of hotels Knowles usually frequented. Agents fanned out to hotels in and around the Jacksonville area to see if anyone had seen either Knowles or his hostage, Deborah Taylor. They came up empty.
This guy's all over the board, doing all different types of crimes. But his trail that he left behind him had a very distinct trademark, so we would know where he was at. The trick was to try to predict where he was going, to try to head him off.
Agents staked out Knowles' family members' homes in Jacksonville in the event he tried to make contact with them or hide out there. If Knowles had taken his hostage to the Jacksonville area, the FBI was determined to find him. Police all over the state of Florida had been chasing Paul John Knowles for nearly 24 hours. He had taken a West Palm Beach woman from her home at gunpoint. Investigators were desperately trying to track his movements. FBI agent James Cavanaugh pored over Knowles' credit card receipts. He was looking for some sort of pattern that might lead them to the killer. Cavanaugh knew they were running out of time.
We had little hope that we were going to find Deborah Taylor alive because of the profiling we had done on Paul John Knowles. Those type of people do not respect life. They have no compunction about killing. The rules are for the suckers. They don't abide by them, and they do what they want when they want.
As each hour went by, investigators widened their search perimeter. The police and FBI figured that Knowles most likely was headed north with his hostage, Deborah Taylor. They thought because he had friends and family in Jacksonville, he may be trying to hide out there. Police continued to watch the highways. Investigators disseminated information to the major media outlets throughout the state.
This is an Action 8.
In his hotel room in Fort Pierce, Florida, Knowles was keenly interested in any information he could find about the search for him and his hostage, Deborah Taylor.
I found out about the crimes when it went on the screen, when they flashed my face and his face, and he was wanted by the FBI, and I went, wait a minute. And that's when I knew in my heart that he'd killed somebody.
Knowles began to tell Taylor about his murderous past.
There were several times that he said that he killed more than one or two, or I don't even know. I think he even said one time he killed 12. I just blocked it out of my mind.
As he talked, she began to see the face of the killer.
When he started talking about murdering somebody, you could just see the evil. It was a different person. It was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, that fast, he would just trigger off into another personality that fast. And I knew I had to keep my wits about me. And like I said, I kept praying. From the minute I left the house to each time something else happened.
Throughout the night, Knowles assaulted Taylor repeatedly, shifting between states of calm and uncontrollable anger. Taylor knew she was in a desperate fight for her life. The only defense she had was her wits. While the search for Knowles continued, the FBI and the West Palm Beach Police Department continued to focus on their only real clue: the red Chevy Impala Knowles had abandoned before he abducted Deborah Taylor and took her car.
Actually did not work.
Investigators inventoried each piece of evidence they found in the car and cross-referenced it with the National Crime Information Center computer. They got a hit. Some of the clothing found in the car matched items reported stolen during a double homicide in Milledgeville, Georgia.
Hello.
The investigators contacted the Milledgeville police. The detectives in Georgia told the FBI that they were working a double homicide that occurred a week earlier. They went on to explain that someone had seen their suspect. They had a composite sketch, but had not located or identified the killer. The Milledgeville, Georgia police told the Florida investigators that on November 6, 1974, Clayton Cooper and his daughter Tammy had been found murdered in their home. Milledgeville police arrived on the scene along with agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. GBI agent Gerald Coffey
There was nothing to indicate who might be involved. The crime itself, the nature of the crime, was not a typical type crime for this community.
In the master bedroom, agents found Clayton Cooper. He'd been stabbed dozens of times while tied and helpless. The room had been ransacked.
Indications were that persons or persons unknown had gone through the residence looking in every possible place for anything of value or something that particularly that they might be able to use or make some use of in terms of firearms or money or coin collections or jewelry or those type things.
In the room next door, police found Clayton's daughter, Tammy. She was lying face down on the bed with her hands tied. She had been strangled. Her bedroom door appeared as if it had been kicked in. Milledgeville Police Detective Jim Josie.
The only forced entry at the residence was to the bedroom door of the daughter. It had been kicked away, the door facing had been kicked in and pulled away from the wall. Apparently she had tried to keep the suspect from entering the room, and he in turn kicked the door in and kicked the door facing loose and gained entry to the room.
Tammy's room had also been ransacked. The family made a list of some of the items missing from the house. They included a diamond ring, a child's watch, and many articles of clothing, including a tuxedo. Inside the house, police found few clues. Neighbors hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. Investigators had no suspects. Police in Georgia relayed to the Florida investigators that the day after the Milledgeville murders, a woman had seen a man using Clayton Cooper's credit card.
That's not a problem.
When she heard of the Cooper murders, she called police. She described the man she had seen using the victim's credit card. The description matched Paul John Knowles. Officers from Milledgeville traveled to Florida. There they met with West Palm Beach evidence technician Greg Parkinson.
They had one of their agents and one of the detectives working that Milledgeville case come down to West Palm Beach immediately. And when they did, we displayed the evidence to them that we had. They viewed everything, but they keyed in on the Milledgeville related items also, particularly the newspaper article, the clothing.
The evidence confirmed the Georgia detective's suspicion that Paul John Knowles was their suspect. Now they joined the search to find him.
This jewelry, go ahead.
Investigators knew Knowles was a killer, and so did his hostage, Deborah Taylor. For hours, she suffered repeated assaults at the hands of her captor. Throughout the night, Knowles' mood shifted between relative calm and uncontrollable rage.
I didn't want to see that other side of him. I just knew I couldn't get him into that other personality, or I wouldn't be there. I wouldn't be here to talk about it.
Deborah Taylor was in a desperate fight for her life. She was doing all she could to stay alive in the hope the police would find her before Knowles' mood turned deadly. On the next FBI Files, the search for Paul John Knowles continues. The perimeter widens and the agents' efforts intensify. Investigators fear Deborah Taylor is running out of time. As the FBI and the police close in on the killer, they uncover more of his murderous trail. Agents know they must find Paul John Knowles before he kills again. A vicious killer roams the country, taking his victims wherever he finds them. He strikes in cities hundreds of miles apart, then vanishes. Police are forced to rely on few clues as they reconstruct his trail of murder and embark on a dangerous pursuit. In this program, some of the names have been changed. Palm Beach, Florida is a vacationer's paradise. Its upscale resorts and beautiful beaches attract tourists looking for adventure and romance. In the fall of 1974, while visiting Palm Beach, Sarah Mitchell met a self-proclaimed restaurant owner named Darrell Gordon. On November 14th, Mitchell's new friend offered to give her a ride to an appointment. The next morning, while they were on their way, Darrell pulled the car to the side of the road. He said he was having car trouble and got out to check under the hood. When Sarah asked him about the trouble, he pointed a pistol at her. He forced her out of the car and started dragging her towards the woods.
Darrell, what are you doing? Let go of me. Darrell!
Sarah Mitchell struggled free and ran towards a couple who had moments earlier pulled to the side of the road.
Darrell, he pulled a gun at me.
Darrell Gordon drove off.
Give me a ride, hairdresser.
While police searched for him, he ditched his car and made his way through a West Palm Beach neighborhood. He forced his way into Darlene Matthews' home and tied her up at gunpoint. He then took her sister, Deborah Taylor, hostage. Matthews was able to free herself and called police. But her sister and her kidnapper were long gone. As the manhunt for Darrell Gordon and his hostage began, investigators got a break when they located his abandoned car. In searching the car, police learned Gordon's real name was Paul John Knowles. As they poured through the hundreds of items in the stolen car, they uncovered a series of murders linked to their suspect, including the killing of a father and his daughter in their home in Milledgeville, Georgia. The Milledgeville police joined the search for Knowles when they learned his description matched a composite sketch, according to Detective Jim Josie.
Everybody was just elated that we had a name to put on the composite and the person driving the car. And it intensified from the standpoint of everybody knew who we were looking for. We had photographs of him, and they were just looking everywhere for him.
Police discovered Knowles spent a lot of time in Macon, Georgia, only 30 miles from Milledgeville. In fact, he had a girlfriend who lived in Macon. Agents from the FBI and Georgia Bureau of Investigation spoke with Joyce Kirkland. GBI agent Roy Harris.
She related that Noes showed up periodically without announcing himself, that she said that he was very kind to her children and occasionally brought her gifts, somewhat secretive about his lifestyle and what he did, but indicated that he was a criminal. He jokingly called himself a thief.
Kirkland told investigators Knowles was always bragging of his petty thefts. She never really took the boasts of his criminal exploits seriously. She said she had not seen him recently and had no idea where he was. Agents asked if she would be willing to help them recreate Knowles' movements in the past months. She agreed. Milledgeville Police Detective Jim Josie.
She gave us a timeline of her knowledge of Knowles' whereabouts. He even admitted to her that he was at our victim's residence on the day of the murders. Didn't say he killed him, but he admitted to her that he was at the residence on the day of the murders.
Investigators used Kirkland's timeline to search for a pattern in Knowles' behavior. They found none. It appeared he killed at will. Between the murders, he often returned to Macon, where he stayed with Joyce or with friends. Investigators immediately put that information to good use.
We set up stakeouts in Macon at various locations, and thinking he may come back to Macon because he did a lot of traveling between Atlanta and Palm Beach.
Police searched Kirkland's house, and she turned over the items Knowles had given her. These included some record albums with address labels bearing the name and address of a woman from Marlborough, Connecticut.
Some of the items that was recovered from his girlfriend, former girlfriend in Macon, led us to Connecticut based on the names on the record albums. Once we contacted Connecticut authorities, they told us what they had, and we started comparing notes.
Investigators in Georgia learned police in Marlborough, Connecticut had been working an unsolved double homicide for nearly a month. On October 16th, 2 women had been found murdered in their home. Homicide investigators from the Connecticut State Police were called to a house outside of town when a young woman reported finding her mother and her sister murdered. The police began processing the scene in Christine Walker's bedroom. There they found the 35-year-old woman, bound. In the next room, her daughter Amy was found in a similar manner. Both women had been assaulted. They both had been strangled. In the era before DNA testing, the Connecticut State Police had few clues to follow. Downstairs, they found indications the house had been robbed. It appeared as if a stereo had been taken and possibly some record albums. Police spent weeks trying to run down leads. They had little to work with until they heard from the Georgia investigators who found Christine Walker's record albums in Knowles' girlfriend's apartment. Investigators had uncovered a trail of murder that crisscrossed the eastern United States, running from Florida through Georgia and into Connecticut. It seemed that each piece of evidence they uncovered on Paul John Knowles was somehow connected to a murder.
We received numerous requests after it was discovered that he had killed numerous people. We received requests from Montana, California, Arizona for prints and photos on Knowles.
As police were learning of Paul John Knowles' murderous past, they still hadn't found anything to point them to where he was. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation put out statewide alerts to be on the lookout for Paul John Knowles in the brown Volkswagen Bug.
People were put on alert. Each shift were alerted that we had a major crime going on at that particular time. However, we did not have a lot of information as to where he might be. So it was just a statewide and a southeast United States continual broadcast that we were looking for this individual.
In and around Milledgeville, Georgia, investigators remained on the alert in the event Knowles returned to the area. While police from Florida to Georgia searched for Paul John Knowles, after midnight on November 16, 1974, he decided it was too dangerous to stay at the motel. He abandoned Deborah Taylor, leaving her tied up in the hotel room. He drove off in her car.
I could hear the Volkswagen start up, and that was the end of it. But I just knew that I had to lay there. I didn't even move. I didn't move until the morning.
Once again, Knowles was on the run. He had allowed Deborah Taylor to live, but if the police didn't catch him soon, he would surely kill again. Investigators in Florida contacted police departments across the Southeast, alerting them to be on the lookout for Taylor's Volkswagen Bug. During the search, investigators uncovered evidence Knowles had committed multiple murders in states as far north as Connecticut. GBI agent Roy Harris.
In a case like this, where you realize you have a very dangerous predator on the loose, everything inside you tells you you've got to get him before he gets another victim. That was the intensity that we were. It was, you're going to catch him, he's not going to get away from us because he will kill again.
At 7:30 a.m. on November 15th, after being held captive for over 30 hours, Deborah Taylor was able to work free of her bonds and call police. After 2 nights of searching, authorities had given up any hope of finding Deborah Taylor alive. Then investigators in Fort Pierce, Florida, received Deborah Taylor's call. Taylor told police she had been tied up in a motel room. She thought her captor had left the motel, but wasn't certain whether he had left the vicinity. The FBI cautiously approached the room. Deborah Taylor had been found.
The time didn't mean anything to me, but it couldn't have been any more than 10 minutes before they had a crime lab, a crime-mobile there, and the FBI and the police and the sheriff. I never saw so many people in my life.
After being abducted at gunpoint and held captive for 37 hours, Deborah Taylor was in a state of shock.
The one man came up to me, and I don't know who, FBI or what it was, he just came up and hugged me like, I just can't believe that you're alive. I can't believe you're alive. And everybody around him, I can't believe she's alive.
At the scene, Taylor was disoriented and couldn't remember much of her ordeal. When she was abducted, Knowles had also tied up her sister and her son. When he took Deborah, he left them behind. Taylor wanted to know if they were all right. The police reassured her that her sister and son were fine. FBI agent James Cavanaugh thought it was remarkable that they had found Deborah Taylor.
It was unusual at that point to have anybody survive. We attributed it to a fact that he did not need to kill her at that particular point of his life. So he left her tied to a bed in a motel room.
Taylor was brought into the Fort Pierce FBI offices to be debriefed. Her clothes were taken as evidence. The police wanted to hear Taylor's story to see if Knowles left any clues to where he might be heading. Victims of a hostage-taking often suffer from a psychological condition called the Stockholm Syndrome. After a period of being held captive, the hostage actually begins to sympathize with their captor as a means of enduring the violence. FBI agent James Cavanaugh knew it would take time for Taylor to see her ordeal clearly.
When you begin the debriefing process, such as was done in Fort Pierce, you usually only believe about 30 to 40% of the first things that come out of the victim's mouth, because they are still under that influence of the Stockholm Syndrome. And so you have to allow them time to decompress, to come back to reality and understand that the hostage taker is the bad guy and that the law enforcement, the medical community is the good guys.
As Taylor slowly began to accept what had happened to her, she told investigators everything that occurred. She said Knowles continually talked about going to Georgia.
He was trying to get out of the state of Florida. We knew we had a several-hour leeway because he couldn't make it for probably 6 or 7 hours at best. And we notified all of the police departments, the FBI offices along the way, that any way that would get out of Florida, to be on the lookout for her car.
Now investigators knew where Knowles was headed. As they continued to track him, Agent Cavanaugh stressed using caution.
The interview of Taylor up in Fort Pierce confirmed a lot of the things that we had profiled about him. It confirmed our diagnosis, as it were, of what he was like, what he was likely to do, and the danger level that was going to surround anybody around him. When he left Fort Pierce with the goal of getting out of the state of Florida, we were concerned that anybody that stood in his way was likely to get hurt.
With Deborah Taylor safely in police custody, investigators focused all their efforts on trying to find Knowles. They knew they had to capture him before he had a chance to kidnap another victim, or worse, take another life. At 8:30 a.m. on November 16th, just south of the Georgia state line, a trooper with the Florida State Highway Patrol spotted a VW. The trooper pulled the car over. He was not prepared for what awaited him inside the car. Knowles knew he couldn't outrun the highway patrol car. He simply waited patiently for Trooper Charles Campbell to get out.
Hey, officer. How you doing, sir? How you doing, dude? Don't put your hands up. Put them up.
The fugitive, who had roamed in complete secrecy for so long, was now out in the open. He completely ignored witnesses. Several people who had driven by and witnessed the incident contacted the Florida Highway Patrol to notify them that they had seen a man fitting the description of Paul John Knowles holding a trooper at gunpoint.
When we received information that a Florida Highway Patrolman had pulled Knowles over in a car and that the trooper had apparently been taken hostage. And then it's bells and whistles going off everywhere. Every cop within hundreds of miles started converging on the area trying to find the trooper's car and Knowles.
Investigator James Gabbard, who had been tracking Knowles since he abducted Deborah Taylor from West Palm Beach, feared for the trooper.
Well, obviously, we were very concerned now for the state trooper, and as was every law enforcement agency in the state of Florida. And so, I mean, the manhunt was on then. All bets were off. We knew that he would probably kill the trooper.
Knowles had taken another hostage. Police knew they would have to move fast if they hoped to find the trooper alive. The FBI, in tandem with police departments throughout the southeastern United States, had linked Paul John Knowles to at least 6 murders and nearly as many abductions all over the country. For 2 days, investigators pursued him throughout the state of Florida. He had abducted a woman from her South Florida home. The FBI was relieved to find her alive. But once again, Knowles was on the run. He wasted no time finding another hostage. Just south of the Georgia state line, he abducted a Florida state trooper. Milledgeville, Georgia investigator Jim Josie.
That adrenaline gets to pumping more when you do something to a police officer, because we're out there to protect you. And if you get one of us, then we do our best to do what we can to get them back.
Police once again found themselves chasing Knowles. Agents learned enough about Knowles to know they had very little time to find him. Agent Cavanaugh understood that Knowles was a killer.
He took targets of opportunity as opposed to setting out to do someone or do something. He would just drive. If he got the urge to see something and wanted to kill it, he killed it. So he had a variety of weapons he used, which is not like your normal killer. He strangled, he used scissors, a shotgun, pistols, that type of thing. So he was more of the frenzied type of serial killer, that when the opportunity arose and the urge arose in him, he would take whatever weapons, whatever means were available at that time.
The Florida Highway Patrol dispatcher tried to contact Trooper Charles Campbell by radio. They got no response. They weren't even certain whether Knowles and Campbell were still driving the trooper's car or not. Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent Roy Harris.
We had at this point learned a little bit about the trooper, that he was a young trooper and married, and I think had 2 children. A lot of that makes it very personal to you, that you carry a badge and one of your own is missing. And of course, we would pull out all stops to try to find where he was.
The Highway Patrol continued trying to raise the trooper on the radio. He couldn't respond. When he heard the radio, Knowles must have realized he was in an impossible position. He had to get out of the police car. FBI agents and the state law enforcement agencies began to track Knowles' progress. They knew where the trooper had been abducted and were trying to predict which way Knowles might be headed. The FBI sent agents to every service station along the major highways in Georgia and Florida. They gave the owners all the information they had on Knowles and the trooper and told them to be on the lookout for the 2 men in the patrol car. Knowles must have anticipated the FBI's actions. The patrol car was simply too visible. He needed another car if he was going to make his getaway. Investigators theorized Knowles used the trooper's car to steal another vehicle.
If you're smart, you're gonna listen to it. Don't try anything. Do not try anything.
Knowles kept Officer Campbell subdued with one weapon while he forced 29-year-old businessman John Stevens out of his car with the other. Knowles secured the men and ordered them into the back seat. Moments later, the men were completely at the mercy of the killer. As the police publicized the incident, they began to get calls from people who had reported seeing Knowles and the trooper. Investigators pursued every lead.
They were working on trying to coordinate the search. It was a lot of determination among the officers that this guy was not going to get away, that they were going to catch him.
All of the leads proved to be false until they got a call. The car had been found. The Florida Highway Patrol car had been discovered parked on the side of the road. When police arrived, a hunter told the officers he had seen 3 men drive off in a blue car. The information was devastating to the police. It appeared Knowles had taken another hostage. The hunter told police he could only make out 2 letters on the license plate. The police officers radioed what they had learned into headquarters. The dispatcher sent out the new information, telling officers to be on the lookout for a blue car.
Anytime you have a known criminal abduct at gunpoint a police officer, and also the other citizen, which he used the police officer's car to stop and take his car, then you know you're dealing with a very dangerous and determined individual. Of course, then we were very concerned for the safety of these 2 individuals. And naturally there was a broadcast all over the southeast United States and looking for them.
While police in Florida and Georgia were searching for Knowles and his 2 hostages, the FBI was still chasing down every possible lead. Investigators had found Paul John Knowles' will. It had been written a few days before the abduction in West Palm Beach. The will mentioned some audio tapes that were in the possession of Knowles' Miami attorney.
We started to piece together the fact that every time he used a credit card, he basically bought a new recorder and tapes. And with his girlfriend's statement, it would appear that he was making a log of his travels and his crimes. So then we were interested in trying to obtain these and see if the tapes would indicate where the hostages were.
The attorney confirmed he had audio tapes given to him by Knowles, but he would not turn them over to police. He claimed it would be a breach of attorney-client privilege. He said he had not listened to them and had no idea what was on them. The investigators started court proceedings to release the tapes, but that would take time, and time was running out. All the police could do was hope for a break, and hope that it didn't come too late. Paul John Noes was a known killer.
Reese, put him up.
He had been on the run from the FBI for 3 days. In northern Florida, he abducted a state trooper and took his car. As police all over the southeast searched for Knowles, he took another hostage. Knowles had abandoned the state trooper's car and was now trying to outrun police in a blue Ford with his 2 captives. While the search for Knowles and the missing men continued, he left Florida and drove them across the state line into Georgia. He stopped for gas in Lakeland.
Maybe just put up $8 in there, that'd be good. All right.
As the gas station employee was filling up the car, he thought it strange that a police officer would be riding in the back seat.
After I drop these fellas off.
After they left, the attendant reported his suspicions to the police. He gave them a description of the car and the 3 men inside. The descriptions fit the missing trooper and Paul John Knowles. Police still didn't know the identity of the 3rd man. The gas station attendant did see the license plate on the blue Ford. When police ran it, they learned it belonged to a rental car that was rented several days earlier in the Tallahassee area.
How are you?
Police took the plate number and the description of the car to the rental agency. There they learned the blue car was rented by a man named John Stevens. Agents learned where Stevens was staying. They searched his room and discovered that Stevens was an environmental engineer from Delaware visiting a company in Florida. Stevens' employer gave the FBI a description. It matched the man seen in the back of the car by the service station attendant. While the Highway Patrol and the FBI were doing everything they could to uncover background information on Knowles' hostages, police all over the state were trying to head him off. GBI agent Roy Harris.
We had a statewide bank robbery plan, roadblock plan we called it back then, where you could put up roadblocks in whole sectors of the state, and some of this was done, but at that point we really did not know where he was going. He could have turned and gone south again. He abducted the trooper near Perry, Florida, which is not far from the Georgia-Florida line, but we in our hearts up in Milledgeville thought he was coming back north, but there was really no way to determine until he surfaced again.
FBI agent James Cavanaugh briefed the searchers to exercise extreme caution in confronting Knowles and his hostages.
Based on what I had done profiling, based on the investigation that was conducted to date, it was my belief that it was going to end up in a bloody mess. Knowles was not going to disappear. We were stressing the violence end, that this guy was looking to go out in a blaze, and it was going to take, concerted effort on law enforcement's part to pin him up. Doubtful you're going to get him to surrender, and just be careful.
Police knew they were running out of time to catch this killer.
I can't speak for other parts of Georgia, but I could tell you it's probably the most intense manhunt that I've ever seen in 30 years, because he was wanted by a lot of people, and he was a very elusive individual. There were a lot of people involved: state patrol, helicopters, troopers, county sheriffs, local police. Everybody was looking for him.
It had been over 24 hours since the trooper disappeared, when at 1:15 p.m. on the afternoon of November 17th, police finally got a break. A Henry County, Georgia sheriff's deputy saw the blue Ford on Highway 42. But he only noticed one person in the car.
He was staying on the back roads as he drove. We had the sightings for him. Roadblocks were established at the Florida-Georgia line and for various points inside Georgia and south of the line. A sighting was made. We heard via the telephone and the radio transmissions that were coming that Knowles was in the car, but the trooper and the Delaware businessman were not.
Northbound on Highway 42.
When Knowles saw the officer pull out, he raced ahead in the Ford. The sheriff's deputy radioed to have a roadblock set up and waiting just down the rural highway.
Okay, roadblock's ready. We're in place.
No one was prepared for Knowles' level of determination. An officer tried to shoot out his tires. His shotgun jammed. Knowles crashed the roadblock. With his car out of commission, he fled. The officers shot Knowles, grazing him in the leg.
Come on, you see him?
He was wounded, but he didn't stop.
Suspect's heading toward a residential area. He's armed and he's dangerous.
With Knowles now on foot, the searchers called in all surrounding law enforcement agencies.
This was a very massive manhunt, and I would estimate probably it was hundreds of officers, maybe even 1,000 officers from various departments were in that area, from the Georgia State Patrol, GBI, Atlanta Police, DeKalb Police, Henry County Police, and just numerous agencies.
Police set up a command center at the site of the crash. They put out information to all surrounding areas that Knowles was on foot and he was armed and dangerous. They had seen him brandishing a pistol as he ran off into the woods. Police dogs combed the scene to pick up the fugitive's scent. They set off into the woods to see if they could find his trail. They processed the wrecked car. Inside, they found a sawed-off shotgun. By now, Knowles had a few minutes head start on police. The pistol he had been using was out of ammunition. If he was going to be captured, he was not going to go down without a fight. He needed a new weapon. With police now closing in on him, he got lucky. He came upon a boarded-up farmhouse. Knowles broke in. It seemed almost impossible, but inside he found a shotgun and a box of shells. Luck was on his side, and now he was armed once again. Police had set up roadblocks throughout northern Florida and the state of Georgia, trying to capture Paul John Knowles. The day after abducting a Florida state trooper and another man, Knowles had been spotted on a rural Georgia road. Knowles ran his car through a police roadblock. He escaped on foot, but was wounded in the leg. Inside a deserted farmhouse, he found a shotgun and some ammunition. Knowles was now armed, but with the police all around him, it was too dangerous to stay in the house. Knowles was limping badly from a gunshot wound. The police were closing in on him. Dogs were brought in to try and pick up his scent. Knowles couldn't elude police for long. He found his way to a farmhouse and asked for help. Suspicious of this armed stranger, Dave Clark went for his gun.
You hold on, right?
The shotgun Knowles had stolen wouldn't fire.
Put it down! Put it down!
His luck had run out.
Put it down. Get your hand off of it. Move back.
Dave Clark had returned from Vietnam several months earlier and had recently moved into the neighborhood. He wasn't going to let this stranger get away, but he didn't have a telephone yet. So he walked Knowles across the street to the home of a neighbor. There, a woman listened to Clark's pleas for help. She agreed to call police. When they got the call, investigators rushed to the scene. Investigators interrogated Knowles on the spot. They needed to know what he had done with the trooper and the Delaware businessman. They tried to appeal to Knowles by telling him that the men's families were in agony. But he refused to answer.
We need some information. I need it now. I want it now.
GBI agent Roy Harris.
At the time Knowles was arrested, he did not give any information about the hostages. We were very hopeful that they were still alive, had been left tied up somewhere.
With Paul John Knowles finally in custody, investigators continued the massive search for the Florida state trooper and the Delaware businessman. Hundreds of searches combed the area between the location where the two men had disappeared and Knowles had been captured. GBI agent Gerald Coffey.
There was a lot of hope at that time, naturally, that they were still alive, and probably was isolated somewhere in a wooded area. And every effort was being made at that time to try to find them or locate them.
Paul John Knowles was in custody, but the two men he kidnapped were still missing. Investigators asked Knowles to help them find the hostages. Milledgeville Police Detective Jim Josie.
Knowles never did tell anybody, to my knowledge, where Trooper Campbell and the businessmen were. At one point, I carried Colonel Beach from the Florida Highway Patrol to the Bibb County Jail to ask Knowles where his trooper was. Colonel Beach asked him for humanitarian reasons, tell him where his trooper was. Knowles just kind of smirked at him and said, you know, I can't tell you that, and kind of laughed at him, and that was a very awful time.
Throughout the night, police combed hundreds of miles of Georgia countryside, searching for the two missing men. From the Florida state line north to Macon, Georgia, they looked for any sign of Knowles' captives. The media was eager for any information investigators had on the crashed car or the missing men.
What was found in the car?
Oh, I can't discuss everything was found in the car, but a shotgun was found in the car, and we are holding that for evidence.
Is there any evidence of anything to do with the Florida State Trooper in the car?
I can't answer that at this time.
You have no new leads on the trooper?
Not at this time, no.
The search went on late into the night as the Georgia State Highway Patrol continued to mobilize as they expanded their search area. As dawn broke on November 21st, police still hadn't found the men, and they were beginning to lose hope that they might find them alive. Later that afternoon, a hunter found the missing men outside of Hawkinsville, Georgia, just south of Macon. They had been shot and were lying on the ground. The hunter alerted police.
Both of them were found face down. They had their arms outstretched as if they were holding hands around a tree. There were handcuff impressions on their wrists where they were handcuffed. But at the time they were found, there were no cuffs. He had removed the cuffs. Apparently he had them cuffed to the tree and executed them. Is the only way you can call it. He shot them in the back of the head.
The two murders seemed to be a finale to Paul John Knowles' murderous spree. But no one could imagine he wasn't finished. Police had searched for days for the Florida state trooper and the Delaware businessman kidnapped by Paul John Knowles. They had been discovered by a hunter. Both men had been shot. Knowles was behind bars. On the 25th of November, 1974, his preliminary hearing took place. He was bound over for trial and transferred to the Douglas County Jail under the heaviest possible security. John Huey covered the trial for the Atlanta Constitution.
When I finally saw Knowles, it was probably the first time that I had come face to face with something that I thought to be that sort of unspeakably evil.
Over the next 3 weeks, authorities spoke to Knowles in an effort to get him to confirm or deny the dozens of murders of which they suspected him.
Here's your brand. Paul, I need to know some things.
On the rare occasions that his attorney allowed him to reply, his answers mocked the whole process. The investigators wanted to find out what was on the tapes Knowles handed over to his Miami lawyer. When asked about them, all he ever said was that they were his legacy. He offered no usable information regarding his crimes. While Knowles awaited trial, investigators from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation continued to search for the murder weapon, the trooper's pistol. Police were pressing Knowles to help them find the gun. They needed it to establish ballistic evidence linking Knowles to the murder of the trooper and the Delaware businessman. On December 18th, he finally agreed to show police the spot where he disposed of the trooper's service revolver. GBI agent Ron Angel and Douglas County Sheriff Earl Lee personally escorted him to the site. GBI agent Gerald Coffey understood the importance of finding the weapon.
We knew that Knowles was a dangerous and desperate individual. But it was also imperative that we continue our investigation and to establish our case. One of the things that would be crucial in establishing Knowles' connection to them and that homicide would be the finding of the trooper's gun. Knowles had promised that he would show them where the gun was.
GBI agent Roy Harris.
He was removed from his cell and placed into a marked county car without a screen or cage, and the sheriff was driving and SAC Angel was in the front seat observing him.
It was a cold day. Both Sheriff Earl Lee and GBI agent Ron Angel were anxious to retrieve the weapon and get Knowles safely back to the lockup.
A struggle ensued. The weapon was fired and the car lost control, glided off the interstate. And during this struggle, when he was still attempting to get the weapon, SAC Angel shot him and killed him.
Paul John Knowles was dead. He had finally been stopped. For law enforcement officials like West Palm Beach Detective James Gabbard, Knowles' death left only unanswered questions.
People like me in this business work very hard to protect the rights of not only our citizens, but the people we arrest and the people we come into contact all the time. And no one likes to see someone come to an untimely end. And I think it hurt us that he died, because I think we could have maybe found out a lot more about Mr. Knowles and could have solved a lot of cases.
A judge at the U.S. District Court finally listened to Knowles' tapes. They held a first-person accounting of the murders he committed. They spoke of his quest for power.
And and the only way he could get power over people was to abduct them, torture them, make them have sex with them against their will, to have some feeling of power and authority that he never had in his life. And I mean, he could actually take a human life and really for quite a period of time wasn't held accountable for it. And I think he became more and more bold and just thought he could get away with anything.
In the end, Knowles didn't get away. Any pertinent information contained on the tapes was passed on to law enforcement. Agencies in cities across the United States were able to use the information on the tapes to solve crimes and close missing persons cases. Investigators found evidence linking Knowles to at least 18 murders. The actual number of murders he committed may even be higher.